What's happening, everybody? It is the Stokastic MLB Deeper Dive. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Well, if you're watching right now, I think, why is the show starting at 4 instead of 5? It's because there's an NFL slate tonight. So 4 to 5 Eastern time, we got the Deeper Dive. 5 to 6, we're doing MLB Live Before Lock. And then 6 to 7 is going to be the NFL Preseason Live Before Lock. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also hit the notification bell. So if you're confused by the start time today, which by the looks of things right now, people might not be as confused as much as just not showing up in general, but you hit the notification bell, you know when all the shows go live. So be sure to do that. It helps us support the channel and you guys get notified when our shows start. Other than that, Adam, and you and I did the strategy show this morning. Not too much has changed. The Giants certainly haven't come up in price from this morning. But is there anything that is different about the slate for you from what we talked about this AM?
No, I mean, I went ahead and did a dummy crunch like an hour or so ago. So it doesn't, I didn't do it with a lot of the updated lineups, but just to kind of get an idea of where I was going. So because I think it's always kind of difficult to talk about on slates like this where the Giants are just like the huge talking point. So I have a little bit more of an idea, I think, where maybe I'll end up. Obviously, not set in stone because I'm going to rerun everything after the show, but should have a little bit better idea than I did this morning of how my lineups are likely to look.
And one thing also that's kind of interesting from this morning is none of the ownership looks crazy different. Like McClanahan and Blake Snell are almost identical ownerships to this morning. We've got the Giants crazy popular. We knew they were going to be crazy popular, but that ownership is kind of holding. So a lot of the stuff we talked about this morning looks like it's still going to hold, but I am curious to hear as we talk through the slate game by game, if anything has changed from this morning. So starting off with the Mets and the Phillies, and I'm curious where you are currently landing on pitchers like Aaron Nola and Chris Bassett in your current build, because at least this morning when we talked about the slate, Nola is really popular. Both you and I thought that maybe a little bit rich ownership given the size of the slate, and then Chris Bassett picking up nearly no ownership. He seemed to make sense in some of those Giants stacks, which are going to be really popular. If we're looking to play a Giant stack and lower the ownership a little bit, you go a little contrarian at pitcher, and Chris Bassett at 2% ownership is certainly one of those spots that made sense to me this morning. Where are you landing on these pitchers now?
Yeah, so still pretty much the same place I was this morning. We have Nola projected for 24% ownership. That seems a little bit high to me. In the crunch I ran, I got about 13%. He's obviously a good pitcher. He projects relatively well. The Mets are a good offense. They don't strike out a ton. They have a lot of good hitters. It's a good hitter's park. But you're still talking about one of the most talented pitchers on the slate in Nola. 28% strikeout percentage, sub 4% walk percentage, sub 3 xFIP. Really, really good pitcher. 24% seems a little bit high, but still getting the sum. And then Bassett pulling about 2.5% ownership, about a 10% chance of being the top two pitcher in the top pitchers tool. The Phillies do have Schwarber back. He had missed a few games. Makes that lineup a little bit more difficult. But Bassett's a good pitcher, 24% strikeout percentage, 3.46 xFIP. I didn't get to much in the crunch I just ran, but I also wasn't getting to a ton of the Giants. So I still think that he's one of the guys where if you are going heavy on Giants, or at least in lineups that are Giants heavy, Bassett makes more sense in those.
Yeah, totally agree. And I mean, there's a couple different ways to differentiate lineups today. One is going to be just not playing a whole bunch of Giants. That is something that's or just automatically going to make your lineups different looking than other people. Or if you're playing the Giants, if you're rostering pitchers who are not Shane McClanahan, Blake Snell, and Aaron Nola, you probably have pretty different looking lineups from that perspective as well, because those three are carrying the bulk of the ownership on the slate, and there are some lower owned pitchers to get to, Bassett being one of them. As far as the offenses go, neither one of them stand out to me now either, but is that still the case for you?
Yeah, still the case for me. It's clearly a difficult matchup for both sides. Neither offense is getting much ownership, but I don't really think that either one should either. If you land on a little bit of Schwarber here and there, that's clearly fine. But on a slate this size where there is a lot of weak pitching, and also where one team, the Giants, is pulling so much ownership, so as a result, you're going to get teams in actual good spots at relatively low ownership. There's not many reasons for me to want to get to the Phillies or the Mets.
Yep, I'm on the same page in terms of that. Offense is big slate, a lot of games to choose from. I don't want to pick on Aaron Nola or Chris Bassett on this slate. Next game to talk about: Toronto Blue Jays, New York Yankees, and I did notice that our projection is a little bit higher on Gaussman than it was earlier. We currently have Gaussman with the fourth best top pitcher odds on the entire slate. Also, pretty modest price point, $8,200 on DK. Over on FanDuel, $9,300. He's not as quite as strong a play on FanDuel, especially because stuff like the win bonus and the quality start bonus becomes much more important. That and near roster two pitchers on DK. But Gaussman at $8,200, he's another guy that I think looks like somebody we could play in the mid-range number one save salary with and differentiate some lineups a little bit. Where do you stand on Gaussman in a tough matchup against the Yankees, but the talent is clearly there?
Yeah, I mean, this is another one where, like, I personally, in the crunch I did an hour ago, didn't get a lot, but I still think he's a solid play. He's projected for about 12% ownership. He's 8,200 on DraftKings, 93 or 9,400 on FanDuel. But I think, especially at that DraftKings price, the first thing you're going to point to is that he's facing the Yankees, and that's a really scary spot to get to. But Kevin Gossman has no business being an $8,200 pitcher. So I think that kind of negates the risk factor there. You're getting a pitcher with nearly a 28% strikeout percentage, 2.83 xFIP. His numbers across the board are pretty comparable to Aaron Nola. Nola's got a tough matchup as well. Gossman is $1,600 less expensive and getting half the ownership. So I still think he's a good play. Whether or not I personally get there, I don't know. It's a big slate, but one way or the other, I think he's a good play.
Yeah, at least on paper, he does seem underpriced, particularly on DraftKings. FanDuel is the price more or less right at 9,300. DK has left him a little bit too cheap, I believe, at 8,200. In terms of stacking against him, are the Yankees a team do you find any interest in? They have struggled over the last couple of weeks now.
Yeah, not really. It doesn't have anything to do with their recent struggles. It just has more to do with kind of the same thing that we just said about the Yankees and the Phillies, or not the Yankees, the Mets and the Phillies, where obviously the Yankees give you a ton of upside, but there are so many good offenses in decent spots tonight, not to mention the Giants in a ridiculous spot and they're free, that it's just really difficult for me to target a lot against Kevin Gossman.
And on the other side of the game, Jamison Tyone, a pitcher I've really rarely considered for DFS purposes, mostly because of a lack of strikeout upside, only a 20.6% K rate. And then it's never like you're getting some kind of crazy price discount on Jamison Tyone. He's still 7,500 on DK. So that is at least, not a crazy value price point. And then $8,100 over on FanDuel. Then you also consider the tough matchup against the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't really like getting to Tyone in this spot, but I do have some interest in the Blue Jays as just being a really contrarian large field tournament team, projected for less than 2% ownership. I don't view this spot as being that much different than what Toronto was in last night. where they went off in a pitcher in Frankie Montas, who's been struggling as of late. So, second consecutive day, I think the Blue Jays make sense as a contrarian team. Is it a team that shows up for you at all?
So I think out of the four offenses we've talked about so far, they would be the one that I get to first because I don't think Tyone's on the same level of pitcher as guys like Bassett, Nola, and Gossman. One thing that does work against Toronto is that Tyone is typically much, much better at limiting production to righties. 134 expected ISO, 288 expected WOBA to right-handed hitters this year, compared to a 202 expected ISO and 343 expected WOBA to lefties. Toronto is basically almost certainly going to have an almost entirely right-handed lineup because that's how their team is constructed. That being said, they are mostly above average right-handed hitters. So it's not to say they can't put up a big game against Tyone and they're not getting much ownership. I still don't think I get to a lot here, but out of the four offenses we talked about so far, I think I like them the most.
Yeah, and I mean, considering the matchups that we've talked about so far, totally makes sense. Jamison Tyone certainly not a pitcher on the same tier as a Kevin Gausman, Aaron Nola, or Chris Bassett. And the Blue Jays, number one, they have a really powerful offense. Number two, Yankee Stadium, really hitter-friendly park. So I do think, at least of the offenses we talked to, Toronto makes the most sense, but it's not like they have very stiff competition, at least not yet. The next game, though, is going to be a different story. Boston Red Sox against the Baltimore Orioles. And the Orioles, number one, I really like their outlook moving forward now. Some of their young players are looking really good. I know they made some changes in the front office and they've made some big overhauls in the scouting department. Adley Rutschman has been great so far. I know that you've gotten to the Orioles a whole bunch lately, Adam. Is this another Orioles slate for you?
Looking that way right now, at least in the crunch that I did earlier. Now, this is one spot where the lineup I used was certainly not the lineup that the Orioles are going to have because the projected lineup as of when I ran stuff, had Terran Vavra in it. He's on the paternity list. They did call up Kyle Stowers, who's one of their top hitting prospects. He's 2K flat. I assume he's going to be in the lineup. Cutter Crawford has had issues with left-handed power, and left-handed power does still play up in Baltimore. It's also pretty warm here, which is nice and a change from the last few days. 227 expected ISO to lefties for Crawford. I like Kyle Stowers as a 2K piece, assuming he is in the lineup. I like Mullins, Rutschman, Santander from the left side. Rougned Odor's 2K flat as well. He can't really hit, but he's 2K flat. And then, obviously right-handed bats like Mountcastle, Urias, Hayes, even though they've all been absolutely awful since the All-Star break, are still reasonable as well. So the way things look right now, I am getting to Baltimore, which I think, I wouldn't be surprised if that does continue to be the case for me. I will say that there's a lot of teams that kind of look similar. So by lock, if Baltimore's a team I don't have a ton of and it's some other team that looks similar, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think the combination of value and upside here against Crawford does look pretty appealing.
Yeah, and to add a little bit of context to Kyle Stowers, he has a 131 WRC plus in AAA right now. He's also at 19 home runs to this point. So a little bit of power upside in a bat that is probably not going to be somebody that anybody is keying on in terms of large field tournaments. And like you said, very cheap. He's the min price. There's a lot you could do with him. At the very least, he makes sense as a plug and play.
Yeah, on the Steamer projects a 199 ISO going forward, 112 WRC plus. Every projection system sans the bat who hates minor leaguers is high on Kyle Stowers.
Yeah, we don't. I'm not going to make fun of him, but it's not like there's been other times that Cardi hasn't poo-pooed on prospects getting called up. But
I already asked him what Kyle Stowers did to hurt him.
I'll just check out your Twitter conversation with them, but I see depth chart has him with a 109 WRC plus. You mentioned Steamer 112, Zips 106. So most projection systems do already have him as an above average major league hitter, which plays well in a positive matchup and also being min price on DK. On the other side of the game, Jordan Lyles is going to be starting for Baltimore. He hasn't been good this year. He hasn't been totally terrible either. From a fantasy standpoint, he's not viable because he's a sub 20% K rate. There are worse pitchers on the slate, but there are plenty better. So when it comes to the Boston Red Sox, I think they're worth getting to, but they're more or less appropriately owned. We have 6% ownership, 6% top stack odds. If somebody's getting to them, cool. If you're not getting to them, they're not really a priority. I think the field has it right here. Do you see anything different when it comes to the Red Sox?
No, that's pretty much how I see it as well. I think the field's pretty much got it right. Lyles has been more susceptible to left-handed power than right-handed power, as you would expect. That's not to say you can't get to him with right-handed bats. He still has a 165 expected ISO, but 210 expected ISO to lefties. So individually, Rafael Devers looks really good. Alex Verdugo looks like a good value, hitting second at 3,100. Nice lineup bump for him. Not a lefty, but Christian Arroyo still 2K flat, hitting fifth. I really wish DraftKings would just guys that are typically starters just stop making the minimum salary. just screws things up so much. But Arroyo, 2K second baseman, looks like a really good value as well. So I think that the Red Sox look pretty good as well. I think the field's pretty much got it right.
All right, next game, Cincinnati Reds against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, starting by talking about Graham Ashcraft and a conversation you and I had this morning, neither of us think he's a bad pitcher. The problem with Ashcraft is that the fantasy upside is really limited because as good as his stuff is, he has a cutter that could throw over 100 miles per hour. It just hasn't led to swing and misses. 14.9% K rate in the big leagues this year. And even his minor league numbers this year, a 20% K rate. So if somebody isn't generating a whole bunch of swing and misses in the minor leagues, it's hard to project that out to happen at the major leagues, which hasn't happened so far. So I don't think Pittsburgh is likely to have a ton of success against Ashcraft, but I think that just the size of the slate and then also his lack of strikeout upside makes him somebody that's kind of prohibitive for me to want to get to him.
Yeah, like he showed up in 2% of the lineups I made. If that happens again, I won't be surprised. If I get none, I won't be surprised. He looks like a decent value, just given that he is facing the Pirates in Pittsburgh. We know they're not a very good offense. But like you said, the strikeout stuff just really hasn't materialized for him yet. And while I do think you see the strikeout percentage increase going forward, he only had a 20% strikeout percentage at AAA this year. He's at 15% in the majors, 17.8% ZiPS projection. So even if it does go up a bit, I'm not expecting him to just suddenly start striking out 25% of guys or anything like that. So outside of just randomly showing up in a lineup here or there, I don't really have interest in him from a DFS standpoint, even though I don't think he's a bad pitcher.
Yeah, and then also something to tie into this and all the strikeout, well, the lack of strikeout upside we talked about from Graham Ashcraft. Today's show is sponsored by Odd Shopper, and if you guys are looking for the easiest way to place MLB prop bets or any kind of bets for that matter, you head on over to oddshopper.com and you're going to see a list of not only all the props compared to all our projections, but also which book has the best odds for each prop. And basically every single 5 days, I end up recommending betting the under for Graham Ashcraft strikeouts because it's always listed at either 4.5 or 5.5. And he just rarely hits those numbers. So 15 starts this year for Ashcraft. He's had 5 or more just 4 times. So considering the lack of strikeout upside, just more often than not, it makes sense to bet the under 4.5 strikeouts for Graham Ashcraft. We have him right around 3.5 today. So that is something that makes sense. And if you guys want to find where the best odds are for Graham Ashcraft, go check it out over at Odd Shopper. Now, starting for the Pirates today, Adam, we've got Bryce Wilson, who 99.99% of people think he's terrible. There's one person who thinks he isn't, but everybody else, Bryce Wilson, we look at the 5.58 expected ERA, the 15% K rate, and we think this isn't really a great pitcher. Now, on the other side, the Reds aren't really a great offense. Something has to give. They could just both be mediocre, but is there one side that stands out to you for tournament purposes?
I'm getting more of the Reds. They offer value. They are getting some ownership, but nothing crazy because, again, they aren't the Giants. And Wilson, like you said, not very good, particularly struggles with lefties. 213 expected ISO, 388 expected WOBA to righties to lefties this year, 154 and 338 respectively to righties. Jake Fraley leading off at 2,500 looks like a good value. Moustakas hitting cleanup at 2K flat. Those would be the guys that I like the most from the Reds, but you can still mix in India and Farmer and Nick Senzel at 2K flat. It's just a pretty appealing spot against Bryce Wilson.
Yeah, and I mean, Wilson's numbers are bad this year. I know the Reds are bad as well, but I do think that Bryce Wilson's a pitcher probably wouldn't have a whole ton of success in the minor leagues right now. And still, we look at the Red side, there is value to be had. I don't think they're a terrible pivot off of the Giants. One thing that is a little different from this morning, I think I remember them being 3% owned when we did the show in the AM, and now they're 5% owned. It doesn't seem like a massive jump, but it does make a little bit of a difference when there's that 2% increase, at least when I'm building out my lineups. But either way, if I had to play one side of the game, slightly in towards the Reds over the Pirates, over Bryce Wilson pitching for the Pirates, but nothing really is being a priority there. They are cheap. There are some bats that could be used as one-off. So anything from a value standpoint as an individual hitter that stands out to you from Cincinnati?
Fraley and Moustakas.
All right. Next game, and this is going to be an important talking one because we have the Tampa Bay Rays against the Kansas City Royals, and on the mound for Tampa Bay is Shane McClanahan. Now, his overall numbers for the year are excellent, a 2.53 expected ERA, 32.2% K rate. But one thing that you and I did talk about a little bit this morning, Adam, is that he has dipped off a little bit in the second half of the year. His velocity is down. His strikeout rate is about half. His first half of the year, 36% K rate. Second half of the year, 18% K rate. And then also his FIP, XFIP 3.7 as opposed to being around 2 like it was in the first half of the year. Now, with that said, McClanahan is clearly the best pitcher overall on the slate. He's very safe. He's great for cash games. The Royals' implied team total is right around 2.5 runs. How much of McClanahan should we be getting to in large field tournaments, though?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I got plenty, but less than we're currently projecting. Like I got around 40% of him in the crunch that I ran, making him my second highest owned pitcher, but also putting him slightly lower than the field. It's kind of a spot where I don't have a strong take one way or the other on like what you should do with McClanahan specifically. A lot's going to have to do with what you're doing with the rest of your teams. Where it does get kind of tricky is if you're going to the Giants, then from an ownership standpoint, you may not want to get to a lot of McClanahan, even though you can afford him within those lineups because the Giants are going to pull so much ownership and so is McClanahan. But then if you're going to more expensive teams, it might actually be somewhat difficult to get to McClanahan. So certainly, just pay attention to within your individual lineups balancing out ownership. But he does project as the top scoring pitcher. 10-2 is not a particularly unreasonable price tag. He has struggled a bit recently, like you said, but still a good park. 2.7 implied run total for Kansas City. Overall this season still has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 32.2%. He still looks like a very, very good option.
Yeah, and even if you were to only take his second half of the season numbers, it's not like it would be a bad spot for him against the Royals. It's still a well above average pitcher in a really good matchup in a pitcher's park at home. So anyway you slice it, I still think McClanahan makes sense to get to. In large field tournaments, though, the 55% ownership over on DraftKings might be a little bit rich. And then same on FanDuel, where he's 25% owned at 11,200 on a single pitcher site. But that doesn't mean that he's unplayable or anything like that. Just somebody that I'd prefer to be a little bit underweight to the field to in large field tournaments. On the other side of the game, Brady Singer is pitching for Kansas City, and he's been solid this year. Brady Singer, 3.82 expected ERA, 25.2% K rate. He's facing a watered down Rays offense, no Wander Franco. It's a team that just throughout the year has constantly been banged up with injuries. So as a result, it's an easier matchup for Brady Singer, but the field is kind of picking up on it. His ownership is now at 18%. He is the fourth most popular pitcher on DK. Over on FanDuel, 18% projected ownership, the third most popular pitcher. Do you think the amount of ownership going to Brady Singer currently is warranted?
I think it's a little higher than I would like. I thought it should be around 10 to 11%. That's not to say not to play him, but it's just another situation where I'm probably not going to be looking to put him into lineups where I have popular hitters as well. So as a result, in the crunch I ran before, I didn't get a lot, but he's another pitcher where like I feel like I'm repeating myself on a lot of these guys. I don't have any issue with Brady Singer. If you have a lineup where ownership doesn't matter, Brady Singer is a good option here. He's been a good pitcher all season long, 25.6% strikeout percentage, 3.36 xFIP. It's just a really tricky slate, I think, to like talk about overall exposures because ownership is just so concentrated in some spots that it's not about like, oh yeah, I like this guy, I'm just going to play him. It's like really, it's more nuanced as far as figuring out what your individual lineups look like. So like I understand why he's getting the ownership. I think he's a good play, but also I didn't get to a lot.
Yeah, and it was something where when I'm first looking at the slate, because there's been a bunch of slates lately where Brady Singer's just gone totally overlooked by the field. And I assume this is going to be another one where it's like, oh, Brady Singer, that could be an interesting option going up against Shane McClanahan. And there's, a little bit of leverage to be had from a sense that if Singer pitches well and gets the win, that is points he would be getting that McClanahan doesn't. But the field's kind of picked up on it. This is the first time we've really seen him pick up meaningful ownership. And another guy that I think might be a little bit too popular. I have no interest in the offenses in this game. Fair to assume that you feel the same way?
Yes.
All right. Guardians, White Sox, Lance Lynn on the mound for Chicago. He has had some struggles this year. Also, a lot of bad luck. He is not actually a guy who should have like a 6 ERA or anything like that, but 4.15 expected ERA, 24.4% K rate. So there's still Ks to be had, although he's going up against an offense that does not swing and miss all that often in the Cleveland Guardians, a team that is one of the lower strikeout teams in the league against right-hand pitching. But when it comes to Lance Lynn, he is a guy that was in the Cy Young mix last year. He is priced down for the spot as well. Do you see reasons to get to him as a contrarian play in large field tournaments?
Not really, outside of just a lineup here or there. It's a pretty tough Cleveland lineup, not only from a strikeout standpoint in that they just have a lot of guys that don't strike out, but Lynn also has much better strikeout numbers against righties than lefties. 30.2% strikeout percentage this year to righties, 19.7% against lefties. Cleveland's running out a lineup that has 5 lefties in the first 7 hitters. So, in addition to guys like Kwan and Ramirez just being difficult for anybody to strike out, it's a lineup that just doesn't set up that nicely for Lynn.
And then with that in mind, and this has been something that Lance Lynn got better about the last few years, but Now, as we've seen a little bit of decline as he's gotten older, he had the knee surgery in the offseason. He's 35. His velocity is down. We're once again seeing left-handed hitters, like you alluded to, if we have a lot more success against him than right-hand hitters. For contrarian purposes, are there any lefties that you like getting to as maybe one-offs or maybe stacking some of the Cleveland left-handed bats as a contrarian play in large field tournaments?
So Ramirez is obviously the first answer. Stephen Kwan looks okay. Nolan Jones at 3,300 looks okay, but I think Ramirez is, as usual, the preferred option.
Yeah, a lot of lefties in this lineup. Jose Ramirez, Josh Naylor, Stephen Kwan, Andres Jimenez, although he's super expensive now, so I'm not going to play him regularly at a 5K price point. And then Nolan Jones towards the end of the lineup. So they got a lot of lefties lined up, and that could present some issues for Lance Lynn. Now, on the other side of the game, we've got Tristan McKenzie starting for Cleveland, and he's been good this year. Better than he's been in previous years, more consistent. Not quite the same amount of strikeouts because he's made more of an effort to keep the ball in the strike zone. So that's cut into his strikeout rate a little bit. Also lowered his walk rate quite a bit. But it's not like he isn't generating any strikeouts. He hasn't gone from a 28% strikeout guy to an 18% strikeout rate guy. He's just gone from, like 28% to 24%. As far as contrarian pitchers go, is McKenzie in the mix for you?
Yeah, he's not pulling that much ownership right now. I had him in my optimal lineup about 9% of the time. We have him projected for about 6 to 7% ownership. Top Pitchers Tool has him as a top 2 scorer 10.5% of the time. So he's still not exactly cheap at 8,900. There's plenty of pitchers that are less expensive, and it's not a great strikeout matchup against the White Sox either. But he is a pretty solid pitcher. Still has a 24% strikeout percentage. He's cut the walk percentage, like you said, 4.02 xFIP. I do think he's going a little bit under-owned, and he is one guy that you can kind of pivot to away from, for example, Brady Singer, who I like Singer, but I don't think he should be getting 3 times the ownership.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And also, when it comes to McKenzie, a point that I made this morning is the decreased strikeout rate is not the end of the world when it comes to the decreased walk rate. Because first, it's not like the strikeout rate is totally falling off the table, like I was saying, but also by decreasing the walk rate, he gets to face more hitters per game. So maybe you're getting an extra inning, you get an extra 2, 3 outs out of him. And that in turn helps lead to more strikeouts in the long run anyway. So not really a death sentence just to McKenzie's fantasy value by any means. And then also, he's just not really picking up ownership today.
Yeah, and to your point too about the changes, and because I understand where he's coming from, but Mike Gray in chat said McKenzie is always in play in tourneys. He's either getting you a huge game or getting blown up most games. That's what McKenzie was when he first came up. He's kind of like the opposite now. He hasn't scored less than 12 DraftKings points in 8 straight starts. Typically, he's getting you in the mid-teens, and then he still has the ability to get those big games. But the cutting back in walks and as a result, cutting back the strikeout percentage, it's kind of made him a little bit less volatile than he used to be, which, it doesn't really change anything here, but I just thought it was kind of interesting because that's exactly how I would have described McKenzie prior to this year.
Yeah, he's had a couple starts where he's given up 4 runs and then 3 starts the entire season with more than 4 runs. That's not some kind of crazy upside for teams against him. 21 starts, 18 times he's been at 4 runs or less. So yeah, he's been much more consistent this year. And I think that just goes to him throwing more strikes. He's a 3.14 ERA. There are not that many teams that are putting up big numbers against him. So White Sox, I've played the White Sox a bunch over the last couple of weeks with literally 0 success. It goes poorly whenever I play them, and this is not going to be a spot where I play them either.
Yeah, I agree. It's just not a spot that I'm going to get to.
All right, the next spot here, it is the Los Angeles Angels against the Detroit Tigers. And by the way, if you guys haven't done it yet, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. A little bit of a different schedule today because we got football starting up in the NFL preseason slate. So we got Adam and I doing the deep dive. Then right after us is going to be MLB Live Before Lock. And then following that, it's the NFL preseason Live Before Lock, which you guys are going to want to check out. Because if you're playing NFL preseason, it's hard to be on top of all the news and know exactly what's going on. That's why we have you covered. We got guys like Matt Gajewski on staff who know literally everything there is to know about football to an extent that I don't even really understand. So he'll have you covered with all that news. Also, if you want to sign up for our NFL preseason package, use the promo code TUIT. You get access to all our projections for just $5. Next game here, Angels and Tigers. The pitchers on the mound, Patrick Sandoval and Matt Manning. I want to start by talking about Sandoval because he has a decent matchup against the Tigers. He's cheap on DraftKings, not crazy owned. And with his 23.8% strikeout rate, I think he's pretty appealing as a pay down option in large field tournaments. Only $7,200. Where are you landing with Sandoval?
Yeah, I expect to be around the field on him. It's a Pretty appealing price tag for a pitcher that has solid strikeout stuff. 23.8% strikeout percentage, 3.93 xFIP. He does walk too many guys, but also has a 23.5% strikeout percentage against righties with only a 131 expected ISO allowed. I think that's important to mention because you are getting a predominantly right-handed lineup from the Tigers, and you're just getting a cheap price tag on Sandoval. So I do like using him as a value SP too.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. The matchup against Detroit, it's a little better, well, actually, a little much better for righties going up against Detroit than lefties. But Sandoval is so underpriced considering he's a 23.8% strikeout rate, and then still the Tigers only a 3.6 implied team total. So things do look good for Sandoval overall. And then on the other side of the game with Matt Manning, have we gotten the Angels lineup yet?
Yeah, Trout's in.
Yeah. All right. So Trout's in. So with Trout in, everything that we thought about the Angels lineup the last few weeks without Trout, where they were just a total train wreck, part of it's still true. There's a lot of strikeouts at the end of the lineup, but this is a massive upgrade for the Angels getting Trout back in the mix. I think that Matt Manning going forward is probably going to start to have more success. We've already seen some of that start to translate this year compared to previous years, but I'm not going to look to pick on the Angels lineup now that Mike Trout is back in the mix. So no Matt Manning for me, but do you feel differently?
No, outside of I don't know, did I get to him at all? Yeah, I didn't get to him at all in the crunch that I ran. I actually am getting to the Angels more than the field in the aggregate. That's being driven heavily by Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, which I think goes without saying, but also getting a decent amount of Renhefo and Ward and Walsh and Adele. Just obviously Ohtani and Trout are the guys that you really want, but Manning is still a bit of an unknown. He's a recently highly rated prospect that was absolutely awful in the majors last year. He hasn't been very good in the majors so far this year either, but still, I think more likely than not that he starts to figure things out. And the Angels, outside of Otani, Trout, and Ward, also still are not very good. But adding Trout back to this lineup certainly makes them more appealing to get to.
Yeah, and I mean, going forward, also, I think that it's going to be a spot where if you guys are interested in looking at some sportsbook odds and prop odds, I think there could be pitchers that are overvalued going up against the Angels just from a standpoint of getting Mike Trout back is a massive upgrade, and it's going to lessen the outlook for pitchers going up against them. But all that aside, when it comes to the Angels, I agree with you. I think this is a good spot to get to them with Trout back in the mix. And I was really waiting to see if Trout was going to be in the lineup or not because it was going to impact how I viewed Los Angeles. Big upgrade having him in, not just for him, but more RBI and run scoring opportunities for everybody else in the lineup. Any interest in the Tigers offense for you?
Not really, outside of just like random dudes showing up. Like if you get a little Baez or Haas or whatever, that's fine, but certainly nothing I'm getting much of.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Not that the Tigers are typically a team that I'm looking to stack up anyway. Next game on this slate, and I'm pretty curious to hear where you ended up landing on this. Houston Astros against the Atlanta Braves. Lance McCullers has not really pitched this season. He was dealing with some, what was it, a flexor or I forget what it's called. There was some sort of forearm slash elbow tendon that he was dealing with soreness in. And then you also have to consider he missed an entire season due to Tommy John surgery. It's a lot of red flags when it comes to McCullers. He didn't pitch particularly well in the minor leagues this year. And now at the major league level, he's made one start. It came against the Oakland A's. He found success. I don't really know how much to draw from that. I don't know what we're going to see out of Lance McCullers going forward. But if the Atlanta Braves are going to be low owned, I have interest in them just because there is a small percentage chance that Lance McCullers is just not going to be good going forward. He's had a lot of injuries that have racked up, and I have concerns about him moving forward. So the Braves, as long as they're going to be a 1% on stack, I think that's interesting in large field tournaments.
Yeah, that's where I am as well. It's not like they're one of my highest owned teams, but I'm getting over the field on them just because they're a really good offense that isn't getting ownership, and there are question marks around McCullers, like you said. So it's not that I expect them to succeed all that often, but there's just like enough of a chance where McCullers just doesn't have it and isn't what he used to be, and the Braves can just really really do damage there. So I do like the idea of getting to them at very little ownership. Technically I guess I'm over the field on McCullers too. We haven't projected for like 1% ownership. I got like 2 to 3%. The same argument that you would make for the Braves can apply to McCullers. Like if you take him historically, he's a good pitcher, good strikeout pitcher, gets a lot of ground balls, walks too many guys, but that's pretty much it. If he were 100%, he would be a pretty interesting tournament play against a lineup that strikes out. I have no idea if he's 100% and what 100% even is. But that volatility still makes him kind of interesting in tournaments. It's just that like there's so many pitchers on this slate that I'm not going to get much.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the reports, at least in his rehab starts, that his velocity was down quite a bit from where he was at when he was previously healthy. And then also in those starts, he had a 13% walk rate in 3 rehab starts, a 7.15 ERA, a 5.82 expected ERA. So we found success in that one start against the A's, but I really have no clue what he's going to do going forward. The range of outcomes is literally anywhere from a pitcher who doesn't belong in the big leagues to being an all-star caliber pitcher, because
Right.
he was really good in the past. Don't know what we're getting there. It's a lot of injuries racking up. And the Braves have a really potent offense. So I like the Braves in large field tournaments today, only 1% ownership.
For what
Other
it's
side,
worth, in his start against Oakland, he was averaging 93 miles an hour on his fastball. I think that's in line with what he used to throw. I'm going back.
he was
He averaged 94 last season.
yeah, so down a little bit, not like anything
93.8 the year before that.
concerning, but it's still a decrease.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, it's pretty much in line with what he's done. Like 2020 was 93.8. Last year was 94. This year, first start 93.
Yeah, so we'll see what he looks like going forward. I have no real confident expectations there, and if anybody tells you confidently they know what Lance McCullers is going to be going forward, I would ask why. So I'm sure like Sean V is going to pop up in chat, and he'll tell you definitively what his ERA will be the rest of the season. Other side of this game, Kyle Wright is pitching against the Houston Astros. Kyle Wright's been solid this year. 4.07 expected ERA, 23.4% K rate. I can't really get to him against the Astros, but do you like the Astros as a contrarian team to get to in large field tournaments?
Not really. They're the Astros, so it's not like I would talk anyone off of them, but they're not one that I expect to really be getting to. Wright's still a solid enough pitcher. He has come back to earth a bit since his ridiculously good start to the season. Does give up quite a bit more power to lefties than righties. 180 expected ISO to lefties, 108 to righties. So if you were looking to pick off an Astro or two, I think Alvarez and Tucker are where you start, which is pretty much always where you start. But as a whole, I don't anticipate getting to much Houston.
If you guys want access to all of the tools and data we have over at stokastic.com, you can get 50% off by signing up right now using the promo code MLBDD. So DD, short for deep dive, MLBDD. That'll get you 50% off your first week of the package. Get access to our player projections, our ownership projections, the top stacks tool, the top pitchers tool, which I find to be really valuable when I'm building my lineups, the individual odds for each pitcher to be top scoring on the slate, the individual odds for each stack to be the top scoring. And then we also have the top batters tool now, where you have what are the individual odds for each hitter to be the top scoring hitters on any individual slate. So this is really helpful, particularly for hand building lineups. Maybe you have one or two spots to fill in. You want to just check out the top batters tool and say like, all right, I have $3,100 left on FanDuel or DK. Which batter has the best odds of being the top scoring player on the slate in that price range? It's a really easy and good way to check that out. So stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. Don't forget, if you're signing up, use that promo code MLBDD. All right, next game here, Minnesota Twins against the Texas Rangers. And I really think this is one of the least appealing games on the slate. Dylan Bundy on the mound for Minnesota, Martin Perez for Texas. We didn't like either of the pitchers earlier today, Adam. Has anything changed?
No, I think in the aggregate, this game might be like the lowest owned game that I have. In the crunch I ran earlier, like 2% Perez, 1% Bundy, 1% Texas, less than 1% Minnesota.
Yeah, it's hard from this standpoint as well. Like the pitchers, they've both been okay this year. Martin Perez is a 3.36 expected ERA, Dylan Bundy 3.85, but neither of them generate all that many strikeouts. The Rangers' offense is also fairly middling. So then we look at the Martin Perez matchup against the Twins, and Perez himself has been okay. Well, I don't think he's going to be great moving forward. I think we've seen the best out of Martin Perez. What he did in the first half of the season is probably the peak of Martin Perez's career. But even when Perez wasn't that good, he was a heavy ground ball pitcher, and that in itself limited the upside for opposing offenses. So I don't see a whole lot to gravitate towards in this game as a whole.
Yeah, same here. Like if you want to target some of the power bats on the Rangers, that's fine. It's not a great park for home runs. It's only supposed to be like 70 degrees as well. Bundy has done a better job limiting power this year than in the past. 166 expected ISO to righties, 136 to lefties. Nathaniel Lowe's $3,200 price tag looks fine. Jonah Heim at 36 looks fine. Seager's always a good play, but the slate's just so big with so many good plays that I have a hard time getting to much of anything here.
By the way, did you see the Orioles lineup came out?
Yeah, Kyle Stowers hitting fifth. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, Mullins, Rushman, Santander, Mountcastle, Stowers hitting fifth. That's a really good value play. If anybody's looking for a one-off play that makes sense, if you really need to punt with somebody, Stowers over on DK. Min price, good minor league numbers. Most projection systems have him being pretty good going forward. 19 homers in minors this year. So good guy to get to as a one-off if you guys didn't catch us talking about the Orioles earlier. All right, now we have a spot to talk about that is going to be of interest to a lot of people. Probably the most important spot on the entire slate. The Colorado Rockies are taking on the San Francisco Giants, and the Giants are priced a little bit better on FanDuel and DraftKings. I wouldn't say appropriately, but DraftKings is just totally fucked up the
Yep.
pricing. Like half this team is min or close to min price when they are in a very positive matchup against Jose Urena, and it's Coors Field. And it's not the first time that we've seen a Coors Field game with the Giants where the whole team is really underpriced. So I was interested to ask you about this because earlier when we were talking about the Giants, you said at least in your initial run, you weren't getting to a ton of them relative to the field. So I'm interested to see where you're standing on the Giants and what's going on in your lineups with them.
Yeah, so this was actually the main reason that I even did a crunch pre-show because I realized that doing it before lineups and everything come out is borderline useless. But I just really wanted to see how the Giants were shaking out for me early because like I can make the case that you should just like jam the Giants in everywhere and then, pair them with contrarian pitchers. I can make the case that you should not play them and just go to other offenses and hope that they score like 4 runs. But I've kind of, when we've been in these situations in Coors this year, I've kind of been all over the board where some slates I'm jamming them in, some I'm not. So the way it played out for me earlier was they were my second highest owned team, actually behind Baltimore. But compared to the field, I'm still getting less. Like, for example, I had 18% Brandon Belt, Fields projected for 36. I have like 12 or 15% Crawford, Fields projected for 33. I think I had like 20% Flores, Fields projected for 32. So that kind of tells me that I was using them. I was getting enough lineups where like, I either have a 5-man Giant stack with some low owned pitching, or I'm using the Giants as filler in maybe, in lower owned stacks, but that also, I wasn't jamming over the field on them. Now that could change again with more lineups coming out, up to date ownership, and all of that. But I think it's pretty likely that it ends up being a situation where I get plenty of the Giants, just not as much as we're projecting the field to get to.
Yeah, I so on slates like this, I'm rarely overweight to a stack like the Giants. It's a 14 game slate and they're projected for 33% ownership. But I end up playing a lot of lesser owned stacks, and then the Giants get mixed in as one-offs when I'm building my lineups through Fantasy Cruncher. And then, what does it matter if I have, let's say, an Atlanta Braves stack that's 1% owned? Nobody's playing the Braves against Lance McCullers. If I have 3 Giants as a secondary stack or 2 Giants or whatever it might be, I'm cool with that. It doesn't make a big deal because the rest of the lineup is contrarian. Something you and I were talking about before is I think sometimes people get too caught up in everything in the lineup having to be contrarian, where you could just make 1 or 2 tweaks in an MLB lineup and the whole thing is contrarian. If you've Chris Bassett at pitcher who's 2% owned, your lineup is contrarian kind of no matter who the stack is at offense. So I'm going to really like the Giants, I believe, as one-offs. And then just stacks, I'll probably be a little bit more contrarian. One note on Jose Urena. Zips hasn't projected for a 7.36 ERA the rest of the season. Can you ever remember seeing a pitcher projected like that before?
No, that's insanely bad.
4.8 ERA this year, 5.8 expected ERA, 5.65 FIP. He is straight up terrible. Walking nearly as many guys as he's striking out. Not great for Jose Urena.
And so I was just looking kind of to see how my San Francisco stacks were broken down. Out of the like if the slate were starting right now, out of the 150 lineups that I would play, 43% had at least one Giant in them. 22 were 5-man stacks, 3 3-man stacks, 13 2-mans, and then 26 with just one-offs. If I look at like my top ranked 5-man Giant stack, which is pretty far down my list, so it's actually McClanahan, Snell with the Giants. So that's a lot of ownership. Taylor, Betts, Brian Serven, the catcher for the Rockies. So, but again, that's like not even in my top 100 lineup. So I think that it's pretty likely that I'm getting a lot of just like one-offs and 2-mans from the Giants.
Yeah, and we got Marcos Amparo in chat was saying, I get the salary, but the Giants haven't been good. I mean, I don't know what the Giants have done lately, but Jose Urena is such a trash can of a pitcher, and it's in Coors Field that it's hard to expect him to have any success. I don't understand how he keeps getting big league jobs.
Yeah,
It's crazy to me because it's not just the underlying numbers are bad. The ERA is bad as well. So 2021 with the Tigers, he had a 5.81 ERA. 2020 with the Marlins, 5.4. 2019 with the Marlins, 5.21. For his career, he was a 4.77 ERA, and he's now over the age of 30. Like, why do teams keep giving him chances? What is he going, like, what's going to change? Is he going to get better at age 36? And it's all of a sudden like, oh, this is the guy? He is ERA perpetually over 5, and Zips hasn't projected to have a 7.36 ERA the rest of the year. So it's two things. It's Coors Field. There's always upside there. And Jose Urena, anywhere he starts, the expectation is at this point in his career, he should get blown up. So cash game purposes, you're playing Giants. You're playing Shane McClanahan. We're going to talk about Blake Snell later. You're playing him as well. Cash game seemed pretty straightforward today.
Yeah, for sure. And I do want to touch on the pinch hitting point that Mike Gray brought up too, because it is a good point when you talk about the Giants. I mentioned it this morning. I'm less concerned about their pinch hitting when they're facing a righty because for a couple of reasons. For one, their better players are left-handed. So like in a benefit of the doubt situation, I think there's a better chance that you're getting like Jock Peterson or Yastrzemski or Belt staying in the game. Lamont Wade certainly carries some pinch hit risk, but also teams just have more right-handed relievers. So it's more difficult for them to just keep throwing lefties out there every time Lamont Wade comes up than it is, when you get the starter out of the game and you have Austin Slater coming up, you're just going to get a right-handed pitcher. Looking at the relievers listed on Baseball Press for the Rockies, they only have 2 lefties in their bullpen. One is Austin Gomber, who threw 60 pitches in relief of Senzatella yesterday. So unless they called someone up today, they only have 1 lefty out there. So there's only so many times, like they can't do a whole lot about matching up. So that's one thing to keep in mind with the pinch hitting. Like, yeah, there is still risk, but it's not the same as when you get a left-handed pitcher and they're putting right-handed starters in. And then also anybody who's right-handed and starting this game isn't carrying pinch hit risk. They're starting them against a right-handed pitcher. There's no logical reason to think they're coming out against the next right-handed pitcher.
Yeah. So the Senzatella injury, like you said, it has impact on the slate. The Rockies only have 1 available left-hand reliever. We just got confirmation. Senzatella tore his ACL. Not really crazy surprising. He had a non-contact knee injury. He's running to first base. He's trying to field a ground ball. His leg gives out, and then the Cardinals put up a million runs after that, and they had to go to their bullpen. So, this is going to hurt them at least for today. But this is one of the rare spots where we look at the Giants, a little bit less pinch hit risk than there normally is. But now on the other side of the game, when it comes to the Rockies, oftentimes the Rockies get overlooked when they're at home and all the attention goes on the opposing team going into Coors Field. The Rockies have an offense that's much better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. I know Alex Wood is a solid pitcher and he's good numbers this year, 3.53 expected ERA, 24% K rate, but only 4% ownership going to the Rockies. Is this a team that you're getting overweight to in tournaments?
Yeah, and because you don't need a ton to get there. They are closer to correctly priced. Alex Wood is a good pitcher, but you do have right-handed bats here. CJ Cron, Grichuk, Rogers, Iglesias is leading off. You have a cheap Montero who is first base eligible for whatever reason. So that actually sucks from a stacking standpoint because now you have your 5-hitter and your 3-hitter with the same position. Connor Joe dropped down to 7th. So from a stacking standpoint, it's actually kind of a shitty lineup, but it's still a team with a nearly 5 implied run total in Coors, not getting much ownership. I would certainly feel differently if they were getting 6, 7, 8% ownership. I don't think it would be that hard to get away from them, but at around 4%, I do like getting a little bit more.
Yeah, totally agree. Coors Field games always have upside. If you could get a team at Coors Field for low ownership, it's usually going to make sense to me. Next game here to talk about San Diego Padres, Washington Nationals. The Nationals currently have the lowest implied team total on the slate, even lower than the Kansas City Royals. And that's twofold. Number one, they suck. Point two, Blake Snell's on the mound, and he is having a really solid year. I think Blake Snell, I don't want to say he totally got written off after last year, but I think there was kind of a sentiment that he wasn't quite the player that the Padres traded for prior to last year. He's showing up this season, 3.26 expected ERA, 31.4% K rate. He is the second chalk pitcher on the slate, only behind Shane McClanahan. So McClanahan right around 50% ownership, right around 40% for Blake Snell. Is this a guy at his ownership that you like getting to over or underweight to the field to in tournaments?
He's my Eyes Stone guy. If the slate started right now, I got like 70 something percent. He projects close to McClanahan. He's got a 31.4% strikeout percentage, 3.32 xFIP. The matchup against Washington is very good. Not a ton of strikeouts here, pretty average, maybe slightly below average, depending on what the actual lineup looks like, but a 2.4 implied run total. And like you said with Snell, it's just, you kind of have to dodge typically that one inning. Like he has an 11% walk percentage. If you're watching the game, there's normally going to be one inning where like he just stops being able to throw strikes. He walks a couple of guys and you're kind of at the mercy of like, if they happen to get a couple of blue pits, you're going to give up 2-3 runs and not be real happy. But as long as he's able to like navigate his way through that one inning, you're typically able to get a really big start out of Snell. And he looks good here. He's underpriced. the ownership is certainly there at 40%, but looks like a pretty good value option as well. So the way things look right now, I expect him to be my highest owned pitcher.
Yeah, I have no issue with that whatsoever. I think he may be better than McClanahan right now, just given some of the struggles McClanahan has had. And then it's also a great matchup for him against the Nationals. And there's a little bit of a price discount on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He's around $1,000 less expensive. So I like getting to Blake Snell. And then the Padres offense, which a lot of people have been disappointed with. I know last night in some tournaments, their key hitters were over 50% owned. Manny Machado, Juan Soto. I know Machado homered, but in general, a massive chalk team that failed yesterday. I'm sure that's going to leave a sour taste in some people's mouths, but a decent matchup against Paulo Espino, 4.79 expected ERA, 17.7% K rate. And the Padres are not crazy popular today, right around 5% projected ownership. Is this a team you like to stack up for the slate?
It's a team that I like. It's not a team that I got to, which I'm not real thrilled with. I'm really surprised I didn't get to more. I'm hoping it changes, honestly, because it's a good spot against Espino. They have a implied run total north of 5. They have tons of power throughout this lineup. Paulo Espino has allowed I think like 228 expected ISO to righties, 171 to lefties. You have Soto, you have Machado, you have Drury, you have Bell, you have Cronenworth. Grisham's cheap. It's just, I think it's a team that's really appealing. Again, I didn't get to a lot. I don't have a specific reason why. I kind of hope that would change, but they're definitely a team where even if I don't get there, if somebody wins with the Padres, it's just gonna be like, okay, well, good play. Like, why didn't I get there?
Yeah, modest ownership against Paulo Espino. It's not like anything crazy off. It's a 5% owned team, which I think is more or less accurate. And that's what our top stack odds are showing as well. But yeah, I think it's a team that makes sense. And also because of public sentiment, when a team is half the field is rostering them in single entry tournaments and they shit the bed, people are just going to be less apt to want to play them the next day. So, Padres large field tournaments, I think they're a sensible option. Not quite as much do I like them as much as I like the next team we're about to talk about, though, because the St. Louis Cardinals are on the road against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Tommy Henry, I don't know really exactly what he's going to be as a pitcher this year, but he's a lefty. The Cardinals smash left-handed pitching, and this is a team that's also picking up kind of modest ownership, only 5.6%. We have them with the second highest top stack odds on the entire slate. So I do like getting to the Cardinals in this spot. I generally like the Cardinals against lefties. Adam, do you like the Cardinals against this lefty?
Yeah, 4.9 implied run total, tons and tons of right-handed power. Henry through 3 major league starts, only about a 12% strikeout percentage. He struck out about 22% at AAA this year, projects to be around 17, 18%. Had an elevated xFIP at AAA. I think it was around like 4.6, 4.7. It's around 5.6 or 5.7 in the majors so far in those 3 starts, 5.68. So you're getting a pitcher that, like, I do think is better than his numbers so far, but also probably not quite a major league starting pitcher yet. And you're throwing him out there against a really good right-handed heavy lineup for St. Louis. The only really expensive bats in this lineup too are Goldschmidt and Arenado. Other than that, you're getting very reasonably priced guys. So I think the Cardinals look really good.
Yeah, it's a team that I'm leaning towards being my single entry stack as of right now. The teams that I am the most considering are the Braves, the Cardinals, and the Rockies. And all of them, I think, are teams that look like they might be under owned in large field tournaments. So I like the Cardinals a whole bunch in this spot. Other side of the game, though, Miles Michaelis, I hardly ever roster him in DFS because of a lack of strikeout upside, only 19%. He's a good enough pitcher to where I don't generally stack against him. So I don't really have any interest in Michaelis, but I'm not looking to roster the Diamondbacks against him. But could you try to sell me to do something different?
I did actually get to like 10% Michaelis, and I think the case is just that he's not getting ownership. He is a decent pitcher. The matchup against the Diamondbacks is decent. They have a 3.6 implied run total. They're in Chase Field, where I assume the roof is closed because it's August. I mean, if he's not going to get any ownership, I just think like you're going to get a decent start out of him often enough. You don't need a ton of strikeouts, and it's not like he's a horrible strikeout pitcher. 19% strikeout percentage, 3.77 xFIP. If he gets you 6, 7 innings, he's going to pay off that price tag. So I do think it's just a case where he's getting a little bit less ownership than he probably should, given the matchup, and then also just given like when you look at the other options in his price range. Lance Lynn's got a really difficult matchup. Tyon's got a really difficult matchup. Anderson's getting ownership. Sandoval's getting like 5 times the ownership. Out of the like mid 7K pitchers that aren't getting ownership, I think Michaelis is the easiest one to make a case for.
Yeah, I mean that's not a bad case. I don't know if the salary savings will be necessary, but yeah, I could see the case for him at least being under owned in tournaments. And follow up question or comment anyway. Randy Forth saying that there's no way they're only going to be 7% owned, referring to the Cardinals. The thing is, everybody's going to play the Giants today. Like, I think the Giants are going to be so crazy popular that there just isn't that much room for any other team to be really highly owned. So, could the Cardinals be 8 or 9% owned? I guess, but I doubt they're going to be crazy chalk today because it's a 14 game slate and the Giants are almost certainly going to be crazy chalk.
If I have to guess which team ends up coming in much closer to the Giants ownership than we're projecting, my guess is the Cardinals. Um, I'm not really doing anything with that information, but that's kind of the trend that we've seen a lot this year is when you get these really, really cheap Coors teams, we typically end up being a little bit too high in the ownership projection going to the Giants, which I don't know if that's a result of fewer people than we expect playing the best projected lineups or if it's a result of people factoring in ownership more, as they get better. But that has kind of been the trend is that second team ends up pulling more ownership. And then also instead of getting like a 36% owned Brandon Belt, you get like a 28% owned Brandon Belt. So the Cardinals would be my guess at like, if there is a team today where you roster them and then you see their ownership and you just go, shit, I shouldn't have done that. The Cardinals are my guess on that team.
Yeah, well, if that happens, then I will be looking at my lines and be like, well, should have just played the Giants more. So we'll see, at least as of right now. And I'm sure we're going to get ownership update in the next hour or so also because still got, or probably even, I forgot we got 2 hours to go until the slate starts. So plenty of time for data to get updated and different information to come in. 2 games left to talk about. And the next one I don't think is all that appealing. Seattle Mariners against the Oakland A's. The pitchers in this game are Cole Irvin and Marco Gonzalez. Pitchers I very, very rarely get to because Cole Irvin has a 16.5% K rate, Marco Gonzalez 13.2%. Gonzalez is cheap and is a good matchup against Oakland, but I don't know that going all the way down to $6,100 is going to be necessary today. So in terms of these pitchers, do either of them stand out to you at all?
No, not really. Like outside of just randomly mixing them in. Marco Gonzalez is cheap. He's got a good matchup in a good park, all of that. Like I got to like 3% of him. I got to 1% of Irvin. But again, those are guys where if I got 0, I also wouldn't bat an eye and wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, and then as far as Cole Irvin goes, he is a pitcher that has a lot of good luck on his side this year. So his ERA is decent, well, actually more than decent this year at 3.13, but his underlying numbers of 4.48 expected ERA, 3.92 FIP. Zips and Steam are both fairly low on him moving forward. The big things with Cole Irvin, he has a 250 BABIP and a 76.1% left on base rate. Neither things that I would consider to be sustainable for him moving forward. So in terms of the Mariners, who are now only 1% owned, but with 5% top stack odds, I'm kind of starting to like them as a contrarian team more than this morning because their top stack odds are higher and their ownership is lower.
Yeah, they're actually a team I should have specifically looked at. So right now I'm getting right around the field. But there were another one I liked this morning, and I still do. Individually, I really like Julio Rodriguez, who's not really getting any ownership. I got to 2% in the crunch I did before, but certainly wouldn't be upset if that goes up. Irvin does give up some power to righties with a 218 expected ISO. The issue is just that you're in this ridiculous ballpark where any foul ball becomes an out. Any fly ball to the outfield typically becomes an out. It's like 70 degrees while it's 85, 90 in a lot of other stadiums. So it's a pretty unappealing place to hit, but Julio Rodriguez still gives you massive upside with stolen bases and power. Mitch Haniger at 3,700 looks like a pretty good value as well.
Yeah, and Julio Rodriguez, I assume you're not aware of this, Adam, but at least in the futures market, Adley Rutschman's getting pretty close to Julio Rodriguez for Rookie of the Year now.
Is he really?
Yeah. Also, if you look at wins above replacement, it's almost identical for Rutschman and Julio Rodriguez now.
That's surprising to me.
It's because of the catcher value.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I kind of just thought, like, obviously, I think Rutschman's been having a fantastic year, but I just sort of assumed Rodriguez was running away with it.
Yeah, I was looking at it the other day, and I think that based on wins above replacement right now, if you were to extrapolate Rutschman's current numbers over 162 games, I think the only players that would come out just more valuable for wins above replacement are Judge, Ohtani, if you include his batter and pitcher stats, Arenado, and I think that was it. Yeah, he would be more valuable if he kept up this pace over a 162 game season than every other player this year.
Yeah, he's been crazy good and not even hitting a ton of home runs yet. Like he's doubling constantly, which hopefully just starts turning into home runs.
Yeah, that's what also is great. He's a 283 BABIP. Like if more of those balls fall in for hits, a 128 WRC plus for a catcher who also is rating out as being very plus defensively. That's an MVP candidate in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So,
and when he came up too, like you mentioned the BABIP, it was kind of like people are like, oh, Rutschman's off to a slow start, but you're watching the game, it's like no, he just lined out at 98 miles an hour like 3 times.
Yeah, so I'm really high on Rushman moving forward. I love this Orioles core. I think you guys are gonna have a good team in the not so
No,
distant
nobody's
future.
sleeping on Stephen Kwan for AL Rookie of the Year. He's literally not in the conversation.
Yeah, Stephen Kwan's like nobody expected anything from Stephen Kwan this year. He's delivering more than any of us thought he would. But realistically, do you want Adley Rushman on your team or Julio Rodriguez or Stephen Kwan? Like nobody's siding with Kwan there. I get that he's
Well,
been valuable over the course of the year, but he just doesn't project nearly as well for the rest of the season.
yeah, well, at 124 WRC plus is actually a lot better than I was expecting to see there. But yeah, I mean, he's been worth fewer wins above replacement than Rutschman, and Rutschman came up a month and a half into the season.
Yeah, and then from Julio Rodriguez also, it's so Julio Rodriguez 130 WRC plus, but something to also keep in mind with him, he got off to a really terrible start this year and started to pick it up. And just projection wise, moving forward, he projects to be so good the rest of the year from zips and steamer and whatnot. So I think that it's going to probably be Julio Rodriguez, could be Rushman based on how he's played, but a final game on the slate to talk about to round the show up. Marlins against the Dodgers. Jesus Luzardo is on the mound for Miami. He's been really good this year. 3.12 expected ERA, 31.4% K rate. But he's expensive and he's pitching against the Dodgers, so it's hard for me to consider him. Is there anything you like out of the matchup between Luzardo and the Dodgers?
I'm actually getting to the Dodgers, or at least I was in that previous crunch. It doesn't have anything to do with Luzardo. We talked about him a lot this morning. He's been legitimately good this year. 31.4% strikeout percentage is identical to Snell. 3.18 xFIP is better than Snell. 10.3% walk percentage, slightly better than Snell. K minus BB percentage, better than Snell. The case I'd made for Luzardo this morning was basically like, I don't think I'm going to end up playing him here, but if you were trying to talk yourself into him, you're basically just getting Blake Snell in a worse matchup at 145th the ownership. But the Dodgers on the other side, they're still just a really good offense. I understand Luzardo's been really good, but you're just talking about a lineup that top to bottom is extremely good. He has only allowed a 143 expected ISO and a 284 expected WOBA to righties. So again, I'm not looking at this and saying like, oh, XYZ reason is why I think the Dodgers are going to have success against Luzardo. It's more so just the Dodgers aren't really getting much ownership, and they're the Dodgers.
Yeah. So whenever the Dodgers are low owned, you can make a case for them. I don't want to play Luzardo against them. But, anytime you get like the Dodgers, the Astros, the Yankees, any of those teams at 1% owned, and it's not against, an elite DeGrom, Scherzer type starting pitcher, there's a case to be made for them. And then starting for the Dodgers, Tyler Anderson on the mound, 3.19 expected ERA, K rate sub 20%, though that does limit his upside a little bit. He is cheap. How do you view him as a potential SP2 for DK purposes?
Getting around the field on him. He's another one. He's just kind of like Sandoval, not the same sort of strikeout stuff, but a good matchup against Miami. Inexpensive, good enough strikeout stuff for the price, coming in at 19.5%. He's kind of just a guy. He's going to fit into around 10 to 12% of lineups.
Yeah, and then I asked specifically for DraftKings because he's $9,600 on FanDuel, which is a largely unplayable price tag for Tyler Anderson. So that is going to do it for us, guys. If you haven't done it already, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and stick around. We've got MLB Live Before Lock next, and then NFL Preseason Live Before Lock. Good luck today.
What's going on, everybody? Eric Lindquist at Stokastic here on the Odd Shopper channel, coming to you with my 3 favorite prize picks for Friday, August 19th. Hit that like button, subscribe button, and notification bell as we get going here. I'm doing the long view because I'm exhausted. I don't want you all to see my face. I am hideous. No, it's fine. I'm feeling okay. I don't really know what I'm saying right now, but I am going to say, use promo code OSMO, gets you $100 first match deposit bonus. That is good stuff. We like that. You know what we don't like? The last 2 days, I came back to the prize pick streets and Aaron Judge doesn't homer. That's sad. And then, the day before it, we got the Judge over. We got Torres over in that come from behind win. And we got Cy Consulate on the mound. And yesterday, it was great because I shorted DeGrom and Darvish because they had really, really high fantasy totals. And just seems like there's been some really high fantasy totals lingering out in the streets this week. So let's get to it, shall we? Once again, hit that like button, goes a long way for me. But pitcher fantasy score, there's another guy that I want to short. I don't want to short Shane McClanahan. That seems about perfect at 42.5. Just a tiny bit high, but nothing that I really want to be attacking. Patrick Sandoval, little bit high, but nothing I really want to attack there either. But Aaron Nola, 39.5? 39.5. That's pretty high against the Mets. We're going to be taking an under here on one Aaron Nola. Remember, they use FanDuel scoring for prize picks. So you get the quality start, you get the win, you get all of those things. But this is a very tough matchup going up against the Mets. And is Aaron Nola good? Hell yeah, he's good. He's got a 261 xWOBA, a 27.9% K percentage, and walks less than 4% of hitters. That's as elite as it gets in baseball for a starting pitcher, especially. So Aaron Nola, very good. But this matchup, man, going up against the Mets on the season, they strike out less than 20% of the time against right-handed pitching on the aggregate. 116 WRC plus and a 154 ISO. This is as tough of a matchup as it gets. And as you go specifically through some of these hitters, you have Jeff McNeil strikes out at a 12.8% rate. Brett Beatty, I think he's going to be a low strikeout guy too. Added to the back half of this lineup, Beatty. It's got to be Beatty, B-A-T-Y. He's got lots of power. Enjoy that. Brandon Nimmo, another guy from the left side, 16.9%. Canna's back in the lineup, 18.7%. Lindor sub 20%. Marte sub 20%. Pete Alonso at 20%. The only guy really that I'm looking at in this lineup, Daniel Vogelbach or Tyler Naquin, they're right at 25%. That is just crazy. This Mets team does not strike out very much. So yes, Nola, 27.9% K percentage, but a lot of the damage he's going to do is just getting deep into this game without giving up runs. And it's a very, very difficult matchup. So I find it pretty simple for me to look at 39.5. And that is too damn high. We haven't projected at Stokastic around 34.6. So we're talking about a 5 fantasy point disparity. I haven't projected a little bit lower because I do think the Mets are too imposing to be hanging up 39.5 for Aaron Nola. So I love shorting some of these fantasy scores on these elite pitchers because it just seems like they're too damn high. And, the K props feel pretty efficient today. I promise I'm looking at those every single day too. But Aaron Nola, we're going to be shorting him. Let's move on. All right. We are going to, where I'm going. We're going to total home runs. And this is a really fascinating board. So Aaron Judge is plus 180. I'm upset with him, but I promise you, I'm probably going to get some shares of that. Don't really want to, I like that we get 4 batters for Atlanta, but against Lance McCullers, he only has 1 start, but he looked pretty good. And that curveball is filthy. Adolis Garcia, Corey Seager, and Marcus Semien. I like this one. Probably going to be boxing in some Garcia if the weather cooperates there in Minnesota.
What's going on, Stokastic baseball fans? Terry McBride here. It's a Friday night. We got a loaded slate, tons of action going on. I found out that this show was going to be at 5 o'clock at about 4:55. I thought this was going to be my catch-up hour. I had my mom up here. We had a nice lunch. We were cleaning the house a little bit and hanging out, and just glad I checked the schedule and I made it here on time. We've got Gundacker here. Fortunately, I'm sure Gun's up to speed on the slate, although he was just hinting that he might have that same issue as far as the time goes. But we're going to hack through it. We're going to figure out everything that we need to know about this slate. Gun, how's your Friday going, buddy?
You're good. I have 2 eyes. That's a blessing.
That's a plus.
Yeah, and my skin isn't boiling and on fire. So yeah, I got to thank EMAC for filling in for me for a pair of shows last weekend. Because I was like, man, I can't come on a show looking like Freddy Krueger, bro. This is bad. But we out here.
Yeah, it sounded pretty rough, bud. But definitely glad you're on the mend. I'm sure everybody out there is happy to see you. It looks like we're getting some comments in the chat, people saying good to have you back and everything. So yeah, definitely glad that you're feeling a little bit better there. And certainly you're looking fine. I was expecting some gruesome, like you said, some Freddy Krueger look, but you're looking at least.
It was bad. I don't know. All right. I don't know if you've seen the pics, bro. I woke up one day like this, and I had no left eye for 2 days, like literally no left eye, and I was just it was weird. It was a weird life for 2 days.
Yeah, sounds it. Yeah,
and my face was burnt, the back of my neck is burnt, so I couldn't sleep laying down. So I was sitting next to the wall like Bubba Gump and
like propping yourself up.
Yeah, and then like sleeping in bursts, man. It was the worst. I don't want
that sounds brutal. I mean, I've never had like sun poisoning like that. Just normal sunburn is miserable. So I can only imagine, man. That is pretty brutal. Got an aloe dacker in the chat here. Couple sundackers. I think everybody's happy to see you back, bud. And put me on that list as well. Let's see. What do we got to talk about here? Hit the like button, guys. Hit the subscribe. Helps us out a lot. You guys out there know that by now, I'm sure. If you hit the like, you hit the subscribe, keeps us up to date with all our shows, our DFS offers, giveaways, all that fun stuff. After you subscribe to the channel here, hit the notification button, get alerts for when the shows go live. Also, make sure you go over to the website. Check out the free tools today. We've got MLB top stacks are free today. If you want to try out all the tools for MLB DFS, the night slates, 100% free these days. So those little wacky, like 2-gamer, 3-gamer, 9 p.m. on the East Coast, 6 p.m. on the West Coast, those little slates can be nice and profitable, and the tools are free. So it's a nice way to jump in, check out the site, check out behind the scenes if you're kind of torn on whether or not you want to subscribe. I don't know why you would be, but that's a good way to check it out. We've also got a live before lock offer with BetMGM going. Get up to $1,000 risk-free bet with your first deposit. Click the link down there in the video description when you're going down there to click the thumbs. Make sure you click that. Claim your $1,000 risk-free bet right now at BetMGM. That's a pretty sweet deal. $1,000 risk-free. We're brought to you again by OddsShopper, sister site. Make your best bets in 30 seconds or less. We'll talk about those guys a little bit later. We got the Tua program going on. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's dive in and talk some baseball here, man. This is what I'm here for. What are we seeing on this slate? Anything to call out, like overarching concerns, overarching observations about the slate before we dive in and talk like specific pitching spots?
Well, it's big time Friday night Coors, and I'm sure you have seen some of these prices for the San Francisco Giants, and that's all and well, and we've seen them do it all year long. DraftKings has kind of dropped the ball on that, but they might be up against the worst pitcher in existence right now in the majors. That might be. Urania is really the worst. So it's a come to Jesus meeting strategy wise, and we are getting 32% ownership on the Giants. So I'm wrestling with my usual strategy here would be like, I'll let the field have 30% of a stack on a Friday night. I'll take everything else because every other team is coming in at like 6% or less in our top stack to ownership wise. So that's really what I'm wrestling with all day, and I think that's the story of the slate here is what do we do with the Giants and how do we be different because they're so cheap. We also have the best pitcher on the slate. One in every 2 lineups right now. So a lot of ownership on a Friday night that we don't usually get.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for me, that typically leads me, and I think everybody who's been watching our shows all along through the year probably knows that I'm going to come down more on the side of saying, hey, I want to get spread out. I want to get away from that Coors ownership. You and I tend to play those situations pretty similarly. So it'll be interesting to see what spots we can identify where we want to go that's not that Coors slate, and if we can justify it enough to get away from what does look like a pretty fantastic spot for San Fran. So yeah, that's definitely going to be a major inflection point on the slate. You mentioned best pitcher on the board in terms of getting a ton of ownership. Who are you seeing as that best pitcher? Who's number one in your eyes today?
Well, I mean, I think talent-wise, it's Shane McClanahan. He's the best pitcher on the slate, and we're getting him at 51% owned on DraftKings, and then right behind him with upside against a meager team, Blake Snell at 45%. So Friday night with 2 pitchers at 45 to 50% owned that just doesn't happen on 14-game slate. This is a pretty weird one.
Yeah, and that's the key. Like we see some of these nights with big slates where you'll get a few pitchers in that high 20s, mid 30s kind of a range, but getting 2 guys up over 40 and into the 50% range with McClanahan there, it's getting a very specific avenue of construction for the slate. And it's a $10,200 pitcher and a $9,300 pitcher on the DK board. They're both a little bit less popular than that 27%, 22% on the FanDuel slate, similarly expensive relative to FanDuel salary and similarly negatively leveraged. If you go in any other direction with your pitching decision, you're immediately differentiating some lineups. You're getting into different angles of what you can put into lineup combinations in terms of bats. If you're going to anything other than like one of those two guys and the Giants bats, you're probably going to be different from 60% of the field tonight. I mean, it's going to be a massive amount of people that you can get away from just by doing things a little bit different. So I do think that's going to be where I end up coming down, but I agree. McClanahan, top of the board, and plenty of justification for getting to him. There's certainly talk and a little bit of concern about, maybe a bit of a downturn over the last couple of games, but that last start out, he only struck out 4. I think it was against the Orioles. He struck out 4, but he pitched a pretty clean game. I think it was 6 innings, 2 runs allowed. And what really intrigued me, I was reading an article about it. It really intrigued me was that he had 20 swinging strikes on 100 pitches. So 20% swinging strike rate. That tells me that those strikeouts will be there for him when he needs them. And it was just kind of fluky that he didn't put up a higher strikeout total. Same article, I think it said something along the lines of that was the highest number of swinging strikes with the lowest strikeout total of any pitcher for the year, or it might have been like, top 5 lowest or something like that. But just kind of, struck me as, okay, maybe that's a good indicator that we're overblowing the concerns about his struggles. Do you have any lingering concerns about those couple blips after the All-Star break?
Not really. Like you said, 19-20% swing and strike rate with a 75% first pitch strike in that game against Baltimore. That's insane that he only walked away with 4 Ks. Like that never happened. So I'm willing to look past, any of these low scoring games because the stuff is still there, but it doesn't look like the field is thinking any differently too. They're willing to forgive and forget as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you're definitely paying a nice healthy tax on his talent. 10-2 on DK is maybe a little bit more affordable than the 11-2 on FanDuel. That's a big price tag to pay with nearly 30% of the field on it on FanDuel. So while I do like it, while I will be getting to McClanahan, I think I'm going to be below the field on the FanDuel number. Partly on price, partly on just the popularity there. Outside of McClanahan, if are you planning on going around the field, or are you planning on undercutting McClanahan as far as the ownership goes?
On FanDuel, I was around the 30% number. On DraftKings, I'm meditating hard, man. I think we think about the 51% ownership on McClanahan, 45 on Snell, and then the 30% on the Giants. There's going to be a ton of overlap. So maybe I could still be aggressive, at least with the pitching. I usually tend to eat negative leverage on pitching that I believe in rather than the bats. So I'd be more likely to be closer to the field on the pitching ownership here than the Giants stack ownership. So I'll probably do that, and then maybe trying to babysit, making sure that there's not an overlap between full-fledged Giant stacks and the McClanahan Snell combos, just to further differentiate, because there's ways to make that 50% different, but I expect to be about 33% on FanDuel.
Okay. Are those lineups where at 9,300, do you think there's spots where you're going to be able to force in McClanahan and Snell in the double pay up spot, or is that not something you're looking to do? And is that too price prohibitive?
No. Well, there's going to be some, but a lot of the upside, I guess, stack wise on this slate, or at least what I want to get to, is not the 3K teams in Coors. It's some more expensive teams. I think one of my favorite looks is, last night everybody and their mother was on the Padres, right? And they fell flat. And today I just looked at the top stack tool, and the Padres come in at they're low. They're at 4% own. After last night being incredibly high on. This is still a high upside team, so they're also expensive. So I expect a lot of my lineups to look like Padres, Dodgers, a little bit of Angels, Ohtani and Trout back in the mix tonight. So I'm not going to be able to afford a lot of the double high end, but I will say I do think the pitching's not expensive. Shane McClanahan probably too cheap upside wise at 10.2K. So there's enough overlap, but it's not going to be a lot.
Yeah, and he's the only $10,000 pitcher on the DraftKings slate, which is noteworthy. You get Nola, tough matchup against the Mets at 9,800, and then a lot of mid-range type prices and fairly easy to get to prices. It's a little bit more tightly packed at the top on the FanDuel slate. You've got 4 guys over the $10,000 mark. Nope, excuse me, 6 guys over the $10,000 mark. So there's a few more expensive spots on FanDuel, and then they've pressed up guys like Miles Mikolas against Arizona today is 9,500 on FanDuel. They've pressed some of the pitching up to some pretty exaggerated degrees over there, but I do think there's enough spots where you can leave it together, and the bats are cheap enough on FanDuel that it doesn't really matter. So on that Snell spot on the other side of that Padres Nationals game, at 22 and change on FanDuel, I think that's fair ownership at 10.5, 45% on DK because he's 9.3 over there. I think that makes a ton of sense. And, you know, kind of like you were saying, he's probably number 2 there, 31% strikeout rate. Is there anything not to like about this matchup against this Nationals team for Blake Snell here?
No, usually Blake Snell beats himself, you know, looking for walks and stuff, but it is a back-to-back start against the same team. We saw the same situation with Yu Darvish last night, but positive park, positive weather, and his upside, you know, I liked Blake Snell more when he was coming in a little bit lower owned earlier this season. But it's hard to disagree that he has some pretty slate breaking upside. Maybe if we're trying to split hairs, the Nats lineup could throw out a version that isn't a bunch of 25% K rate guys. I'm looking at Voit. I don't know if we got to confirm one, but in my projected, I had Robles, Voit, CJ Abrams, Tres Pereira is the only guys with like over 20% K rates against lefties. So maybe it's a little bit more scrappy, but it's still a bad team. So I'm not going to overthink it.
Yeah, I mean, worst case, I think you're looking at something where maybe they limit the strikeouts a little bit, but I'm still not afraid of them, you know, putting a big ding on him or anything like that. So I think I'm with you there. Who's your number 3 then? If we're going away from McClanahan, we're going away from Snell, we want to get a little bit different. Are you seeing it as Aaron Nola as that next spot, even in a tough spot against the Mets? For me, on talent, I think he's the next guy on that list, if not, you know, the top guy on the list. But it is a tough matchup. Mets don't strike out all that much. Obviously, a bunch of really good bats. Is it him, or are you looking to somebody else as your next guy or your first pivot?
So talent-wise, it's Nola, but ownership-wise for me, it's actually Brady Singer. Okay. On DraftKings 8,300, I think that's a really soft landing spot in that SP2 spot, really plus environment in Tropicana. Guy that can give you 100 bullets out of his pitch count, and in this spot against the Rays, we can really lean on his lefty splits. I know Harold Ramirez, Rosarena, and Isaac Paredes are in the lineup, but there's a lot of lefties here. And Brady Singer has almost a 30% K rate this year to lefties. And we could tap into that. And on the season, a sub-4 expected ERA, you know, not the greatest out there, but that dog will hunt here at 8.3 K. And the Rays offense really doesn't, you know, strike a lot of fear into me. So I'm ending up with a lot of Brady Singer. On DraftKings as my SP2, and then on FanDuel, I can mostly trust him to give me that 6-inning shot at a quality start. So might cover up some strikeouts that maybe don't come. But yeah, Brady Singer for me is 3rd in my ownership.
All right. Yeah, I like that spot. 8,600 on the FanDuel slate, 83 over on DK. And honestly, at 14.5% ownership, you could argue that that's a little bit low. I know it's a big slate, a lot of spots to go to, and obviously the 2 guys at the top are drawing a ton of attention, but that's a pretty good price for a pitcher with as much talent as he's got. You mentioned the split numbers, but then, you know, the overall 25.5% strikeout rate over 104 innings this year with a 3.35 xFIP. He's allowed a little bit of hard hit, a little bit of barrel, 10% barrel rate, 40.6% hard hit, but only a 3.1% home run rate. So it's not getting out of the yard all that frequently against him. And he's got definite strikeout upside against a team that, you know, for their obvious talent in some spots, there's plenty of strikeouts in this lineup. And they've kind of performed as a collective kind of middle of the road. So yeah, I like that spot a lot. And I think that I can get at least to the field. And if the field's going to be 12, and if I end up like 15, 18 on FanDuel, I'm pretty happy about it. But it's definitely going to depend on where I come down on some of these other spots that we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, because I do think there's some interesting other spots that probably the field's just not going to be touching at all. So I think there's a few guys like this that I'm going to want to spread around to from Singer. So who are some other guys on your list in general that you're looking to spread some shares around to if you're not dumping everything that you've got into McClanahan and Snell?
Unfortunately, Kevin Gossman is on the list.
Against our Yankees.
Yeah, I just Yankees will feed some strikeouts. Jose Barrios was, I think, the best play on the slate yesterday. So it is what it is. I'll be there on that. let's see, look at my last crunch. I had a little bit of Tristan McKenzie, of course, Aaron we mentioned, and then I'm not sure where I'm going to end up on Tyler Anderson, but right now he was like my sixth highest owned pitcher, and usually I don't play Tyler Anderson at that aggressiveness. So, but Tristan McKenzie I think is an interesting talking point. I heard Adam and Greg talk about him a little bit on the deeper dive, and they brought up some good points, man. McKenzie carries this kind of Blake Snell-ish aura about him where he walks a lot and he gets in trouble, but that has not really been the case for a while. No. And he's giving you a floor, and at 8,900 on DK hasn't got you less than double-digit fantasy points since June. So he's very interesting. And man, how many righties have we seen really surprise us against the White Sox all year long that put up a huge number? So Tristan McKenzie really might be a fun play tonight.
That's an interesting spot. And I tell you what, 8,900 on DK, sub 10% ownership. That's a pretty interesting call. 9,000 on FanDuel, 5% owned. I like that spot. 23.8% strikeout rate over the course of the season. Like you said, the White Sox have yielded some decent sized games to right-handed pitching over the course of the season. They've had their ups and downs in terms of injuries, and this is a more full version of the lineup, but it's not their complete lineup. No Timmy Anderson, no Robert. So definitely two big bats out of that lineup. I like that spot. And to your point, McKenzie, only a 6.7% walk rate over 134 2/3 this year, and a sub 1 whip, 0.97 whip. That's fantastic. So yeah, he's really turned it around from that kid who issued too many free passes. Last year, it was 11.7% walk rate, a 1.18 whip. So, I mean, that's a major improvement. So yeah, I think that's a nice targetable spot. Let's talk Gausman real quick, because, I do agree that the Yanks can definitely yield some strikeouts. There's obviously some danger in going to that spot, but he's been fantastic in terms of limiting the long ball this year. 1.37% home run rate, even bringing that into Yankee Stadium, you're not really going to sweat that much power against him. 27.7% strikeouts, 4.1% walk. He's been pretty fantastic. He's only 8,200 on DK and only 9% owned. Maybe it's trickled up a little bit, but not expensive, not popular on DK. How much Gausman are you looking to get? Are you looking to like double the field, triple the field? Where are you looking to be on that Gausman ownership? Because that looks like a very good spot, price and popularity wise.
I don't want more than 10%, but it may be a little biasness. I don't want to root that hard against, you know what I'm saying? I'm scumdaggering this game outside. I'm not playing Tyon. I'm gonna have three sides of this spot, but Gausman, I think at 8,200 on DK, it's just there's a pretty soft landing at that price where if he got you 16, it doesn't hurt you. And he has 40 fantasy point upside.
Yeah. Is he in play for you at 93 on FanDuel, 2.5% owned?
He is, but I'm obviously a lot less urgency for me or less pressure to play him because I have only need to play one. Where on DK, I'm trying to spin the wheel, make a deal on two spots. So
yeah, you got more.
Yeah, he's in play everywhere, but especially at 8,200.
Yeah. So let's talk Tyon on the other side of this one. No desire to go there, even for 7,500 on the DK slate, 0.6% ownership. It's obviously a very good Blue Jays lineup. He's been serviceable, 3.82 xFIP, 20.6% strikeout rate, not many walks, doesn't give up too many free opportunities, but not a ton of upside. Any reason to go to Tyon if you're building 150 lineups? And if so, how many of them?
I just don't see the need on this slate. I don't know that he really has a ceiling that I could see being the Friday night special. Mm-hmm. And, inherently he just has a 1 in 5 K rate. It's kind of like the right-handed Jordan Montgomery when he was with us, maybe a better real life pitcher than a fantasy pitcher. And Higashioka's been in the dish here, so less of a great pitch framer to work with. So just really nothing for me here.
The boost there. Yeah, I agree. I don't see much there. If he trickled into 1 or 2, I don't know that I'd rush to take him out of there, but it's not a great matchup. He's not showing a ton of upside. And then I'm just looking for some interesting names on the other side of some of these games. Like we talked about Aaron Nola going up against the Mets. On the other side of that one, we've got Chris Bassett, who's been very good this year going up against the Phillies. For me, he's projecting downboard too far for me to be able to justify the 10-3 price. How's he looking for you? Are you getting to any Bassett? Does he look interesting at all, or is it just kind of a pass?
I put him in the pool. I think I ended up grabbing 5 or 6, but the Phillies, really both teams, but the Phillies in Citizens Bank Park, I tend to be very scared of them. But to Bassett's credit, Does have that 1-4 K rate ability at 3.12 expected ERA. He's a really good pitcher, and maybe he's an obvious pivot in hindsight to maybe like a Blake Snell or something like that. And that would make some sense. So I don't want none, but right in my last crunch, I didn't get but 6%. But I will say, this being the time slot, a lot different than usual. Still waiting for a lot of lineups and some information to come out. So a lot of that is very subject to change.
Yeah, that's one of the spots I want to keep an eye on. And I'm actually kind of excited about having the free hour not being on the show from 6 to 7 to be able to actually like sit here and dig into these lineups a little bit. If I don't end up pushing a little bit more Bassett than the field here, he's 1% owned on FanDuel at 10-3. And like you said, 1-4 strikeout is 24.2% strikeout rate, a 3.46 xFIP. It's a tough matchup against the Phillies for sure in Philadelphia, but I think he's talented enough that I can justify a few spots if I'm pulling shares from McClanahan, who's more expensive, from Snell, who's a little bit more expensive. I think I can justify it and maybe get over the field. So it's one of those spots that I'm going to keep an eye on as I'm going through the process, and I might end up pushing a few extra shares in. Who else is on the board for you in terms of the mid-range to those like $8,000 and $9,000 guys on either side? Who else is on the board for you there? You mentioned Tyler Anderson, actually. Let's talk Tyler Anderson because he's coming up a little bit for me too.
Yeah. All right. Let me see my last crunch.
Yeah, I gotta scroll down to that game as well. Anderson going up against the Marlins, for anybody wondering out there, pitcher for the Dodgers out in Los Angeles, last game of the night. 128 and a third this year for Anderson, over 20 starts, 19.9% strikeout rate, a 4.08 xFIP. So obviously going up against the Marlins, is it matchup driven? Is it talent driven? What are we seeing here for Tyler Anderson?
I just think the projection came in maybe stronger than I would put it, but if you look at the Marlins and look away from Tyler Anderson's numbers for a second, 71 WRC plus on the season against lefties with a 28% K rate. I mean, those numbers,
that's a target.
That lights you up. Only Miguel Rojas and Nick Fortes in the projected lineup had a sub 24% K rate against lefties. There's a lot of strikeouts here. So maybe we can get that 12% swing and strike rate that Anderson's had this year to show up a little bit more. And at 7,900, again, 16 plus fantasy, I'll take it in my SP2 spot, plus park, plus matchup. So I think a lot of it is matchup driven versus the metrical side of Anderson's advanced metrics. And it's really just a DraftKings thing. I didn't really get to him on FanDuel. But I think it's the matchup and projection, which I may just leave it alone. Sometimes I tweak it and I end up hating myself later. But if this Marlin lineup,
those nights well.
If the Marlins lineup, it comes out as projected, it's a bad lineup. Yeah. And there's not really much they can do to change it.
Yeah, I think that's a spot that even on the FanDuel side for 96, I mean, it's a dramatically different price. But comparative to some of the other top options on the board, I think he plays. I think I have a little bit more faith in him and that matchup than I do in the Miles Mikolas one. And they're similarly priced, similarly projected on my board. And I trust him certainly more than like a Marco Gonzalez, even though there's the good matchup for Marco against the A's that we'll get to in a minute for very cheap. That said, 8,200 versus 6,100 for Marco. 6,100 on DK is a very different price in that spot. So I think I'll have some Anderson even on FanDuel for the higher price, but definitely like the spot at 7,900 and only 11% popularity. That's probably too low given the nature of this matchup against this low end Marlins team. So I think that's a spot to definitely smash, get over the field a little bit on the DK side of things. Let's see. Are you getting, so let's talk value guys then, since I just mentioned one of them in Marco Gonzalez. Is he on your board for value pitcher? Because I think he would be for me if I was on the DK slate where he's only 6,100 going up against that A's team that I've just been picking on all year. Not that Marco's a pitcher that I trust or like to go to, but I think there's just enough there given the matchup. Is that a spot for you?
I think there's a floor worth getting to. And I guess if he snuck into 20, yeah, I don't have any right now. Okay. But I certainly wouldn't push back. 6,100 is. I
mean, there's plenty of reason to push back.
Yeah,
we're talking about a pitcher with a 13.2% strikeout rate this year, a 4.88 xFIP. Like, this is not a good pitcher, but I think the A's are worse than he is bad.
I would agree with that. There's like 5 hitters the same or more expensive than him. So if you get a home run score out of them and it allowed you to pay up for Ohtani, Judge, I don't know, Mookie, Turner, stuff like that, I definitely understand it. The only thing is I do feel like on a slate like this with 28 options, the ceiling is way more important than the floor or Marco's median. So
yeah, it's unlikely that you're going to have all those other guys fall that short where his handful of points is going to make that difference up for you, I think.
Exactly. If it's like 6-game slate and I'm like, yeah, he'll get me 10-12, I'll take that SP2.
Yeah.
I don't know if 10-12 is going to be enough tonight from a pitcher spot on DK. It might, but I don't think it would.
Yeah, and he is going to the credit for 6,100. He's still only going like 1% owned. So the field is smart enough to know that that's a terrible pitcher, and there's not a lot of good reason to go to him. But with that ownership as the value play, I could see maybe throwing him into a few lineups over there on DK. Who do you like in that value price range if you're not going to him? Are you looking at like the Dylan Bundys of the world, the Matt Mannings of the world? Where are you looking for your super value pitcher if you're going to that level at all?
Yeah, I haven't done much dumpster diving, and I think Tyler Anderson might be my cheapest pitcher in my pool.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Patrick Sandoval, 7,200 against Detroit?
Yeah. So I think the thought of him is nice, but the ownership on him at 15%, it feels a little fluffy. I know the Tigers are just bad, but against lefties, they're less bad. So again, seeking upside, I just don't know if I buy into him, but I guess he would be the lesser of all evils down there. I just wish it didn't come with 15% ownership. This Tigers lineup, 22% K rate, still below average in WRC plus, but I guess, it would. He makes a lot of sense. It's just, I don't like that 15% ownership.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Sitting on our board, 11% probability of being a top two. That does put him fifth on the board, but 15% ownership. So we're talking about negative leverage, 15% probability of being the top two value play. So he's owned pretty damn efficiently by the field. That said, on talent, probably one of the more talented guys in that level, and definitely matchup wise, a great spot for the matchup. Is there anybody else in that price range that compares, or is there anybody else like in the mid range that you want to call out that we should be talking about, like your Lance Lynn's, your Jesus Luzardos, your Lance McCullers of the world, or are those all just kind of matchups against Cleveland, the Dodgers, and Atlanta?
Have we changed our opinion on Lance Lynn after 5 not the worst starts, right? He came back.
I think we kind of overblew him being dead when he first came back.
I would agree. I naturally I don't love pitching against the Guardians. They tend to be pretty scrappy, especially if you're hunting strikeouts. But he has a 20 bomb against them, and he's shown a little bit more swing and miss stuff lately. Yeah. So maybe he's falling through the cracks, and he's carrying this misperception, right? I don't think he's the elite Lance Lynn, but he's given us some very usable outputs here. So maybe he's somebody to think about.
Yeah, I think honestly that's probably one that's going to sneak past the field entirely. And at 7,800 on DK, 0.6% owned, I think that's a spot where you can grab a few shares, even against a low strikeout team like the Guardians, a team with a little bit of power, a little bit of offense. I think there's enough on the bone with Lance Lynn. It's a pitcher I've had a lot of trust in for a long time now. The blips are still impacting some of his line. He's got a 4.59% home run rate this year. He's allowed a 42.2% hard hit. There's some happenstance in that. He's got a 5.62 ERA that I think is part of what's sending the field running screaming from him. But if you look at the underlying 24.4% strikeout rate, a 12.4% swinging strike rate, a 3.39 xFIP, those are some solid numbers. So I think he's on the board. I don't know that I'd go there all that aggressively at 9,200 on FanDuel, but I think as a DK alternative, like mid-range, low price pitcher with no ownership on him, know that you're doing it in not necessarily the greatest matchup, but it seems like a good spot to me. I think that's to take your phrase, I think that dog will hunt a little bit here. So that's one that I would definitely have on my radar there. Anybody else that we haven't touched on pitcher wise?
No, I don't. I guess I heard them talking about Lance McCullers a little bit earlier. I didn't know. I didn't quite know what to expect in game one in terms of pitch count. He was pretty efficient for Lance McCullers, I guess, historically, but it was also the Oakland Athletics. So I might, wait that one out at 9,400, but maybe that's something we put an asterisk. I don't like the Braves matchup. They're going, they've been seeing some elite pitching for a couple days now. I obviously have no interest in Alex Wood. Kyle Wright could individually have some strikeout potential, but don't like that matchup. But he is a big ground ball guy with some strikeout upside. But all these guys are just easily dismissible when there's guys, within $300 of them to reach up or reach down for. So I think we pretty well covered it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just the case where we're getting, on a lot of slates. Yeah, that's a guy I would be interested in the colors, but he's going up against the Braves, who their offensive upside is such that it kind of impacts the projection. It impacts my desire to get there, even though they do strike out aggressively against righties. He's got that history of putting too many guys on base, and he's a guy who plays with fire. So against the team that creates runs that well, I kind of worry about it, even with the strikeout upside. So I'm not getting a ton of that. We talked about Bassett from the mid-range, Jesus Luzardo is going up against the Dodgers. Normally I'd be interested in Luzardo, but I'm not touching it against the Dodgers, even at 85. So I think a lot of the mid-range is just kind of, and Kyle Wright as well, I think they're all just chewed up by some of those brutal matchups. So it's an interesting slate that way. One other guy on the board here, just because another one of those spots where it's just a team I like to pick on matchup wise, and he's only 7,000, and again, no ownership whatsoever. I'm just hunting for like a DK value play to throw to the people here. What about Graham Ashcraft going up against the Pirates? I know he's not been good at all. 14.9% strikeout rate, a 4.06 xFIP, I guess is fine, but great matchup against the Pirates. Any reason to go to Graham Ashcraft?
Yeah, I mean, a sub-4 expected ERA going against a team that only Newman and Reynolds have a sub-24% K rate against righties in the last 2 years. So there are some – you could accidentally fall into a strikeout per inning and not die. We haven't seen the swing and miss stuff at an elite clip in the major league level, but if you're
or even a league average clip,
yeah, if you have a checkbox of matchup, park, and a run total, I guess there would be enough checks there to get some shares of if you had a risk tolerance that was a little bit bigger than mine.
Yeah, and that's it. It's all about knowing what you're getting into, knowing what your risk tolerance is. And, for 7,000 and no ownership there in that matchup, maybe he grabs you enough points. But like we talked about before, big slate with a few big upside spots. So you're kind of rolling the dice on, how those matchups go, how those performances go, him having to get there. You're adding a lot of weight onto that scale of probability there. So I agree. It's not necessarily the best spot. Let's see. We've been talking pitching for straight on through for 5:39. How about that? It's flying by. Let's talk about some business, because I probably should have read some of these before. Tua, I mentioned that before. The NFL preseason is officially here. We've got a preseason slate tonight. I think there's a preseason live before lock coming up after this show, so stick around for that. But the NFL preseason is officially here, which means we have preseason DFS projections on the site. Surprise, surprise. We're giving them to you for only $5 for a limited time. So grab them now. You can find the link to claim your $5 preseason projections in the description below, or use the promo code TUA. That's TUA, all caps, TUA, at checkout. And that promo code's down there. Hit the like, hit the subscribe on your way down. Let's do Odd Shopper as well. We'll knock that one out. Odd Shopper is the sister site of Stokastic. I think you guys all know that by now, but if it's your first time here, it's our sister site. You can find it linked from the top of the Stokastic website. There's a little tab that says Odd Shopper, or you can just type that directly in, and there's 2 S's in the middle. Odds Shopper, all one word. Make your best bets in 30 seconds or less with Odd Shopper. It's got hundreds of bets featured daily. It gives you the edge you need in betting player props, game lines across all sports. Sign up for free now via the link, again, down there in the video description. Just check down there every day, guys. Just jump down there. You find out who's on the shows. You hit the like button. You click the links. Everybody's happy. You get all of the information that you need. You get all the promos you need. If you sign up now via that link, you can gain access to our proprietary data, which will help you make your best bets with expected win percentages, ROIs included. We use the same DFS projections that we use over at Stokastic to filter out the best bets available. It features a parlay builder with optimized parlays. It features an arbitrage tool to identify risk-free, guaranteed profit bets across sportsbook. You can't beat that, guys. Guaranteed profit, risk-free. Jump over to Odd Shopper. Check it out. I am pretty confident you'll be happy with what you find over there. We've got the Stokastic MLB live promo code rolling as well. I'm just knocking out all the business. 50% off. You guys have heard this promo all over the place. MLB live, all caps, all one word, gets you 50% off of any of the plans, whether that's the MLB weekly plan, whether that's the platinum plan that includes everything from soup to nuts, baseball, basketball, football, hockey, NASCAR, golf, tennis, whatever else is going on out there in the world. If there's DFS for it, we're covering it. You can get that on the platinum plan. If you want only baseball for the next few weeks of baseball season, if you want only football, you jump on an NFL only. Regardless, use that. You get 50% off. That's promo code MLB Live. That's for new users only. Fantasy Cruncher not included. All right, we knocked out a bunch of business. So, Gunn, I'm going to kick it over to you, buddy. What is your top stack tonight? Who's your favorite offense on the board?
So far my highest own was the Padres. I just kind of had this the field got super burned last night. I don't know if you were part of that. Where the Padres looked like they couldn't miss, and they missed. And then today, and basically it came down to this. I mentioned it earlier. 30, or I just refreshed our top stacks tool, which is free, by the way. There's no reason you guys should have this pulled up right now on a Friday night. 31% owned Giants stack ownership, leaving the next highest owned stack on DraftKings being the Cardinals. Terry, we could literally stack all but one team and be different and probably be above the field in really, really good spots. So it's kind of fun to think of this slate like that. It just sucks that stack is in such a massive spot against Jose Urena. But I had the Padres as my top stack at last crunch.
All right. I am expecting to have a good amount of Padres given that matchup against Paolo Espino. I think there's a lot to like about that Pods lineup. The one that I'm getting to a little bit more, though, is the one that ranks number 2 on the Stokastic board, and that's the St. Louis Cardinals. That's been one of my hot spots all year long. He's going to the Cards against the lefty. I think playing in Arizona, going up against a lefty like Tommy Henry, there's a lot of upside for these Cards. So let's talk through those two offenses, and then we'll talk a little bit specifically about Coors Field. If you're going to the Pods, who are some of your favorite bats on that team to go to? We all know there's Juan Soto there. We all know there's Manny Machado there. Outside of those two guys, who are some of your favorite bats to go to on the Padres?
So the lineup just came out.
Okay.
Profar is going to lead off. I think yesterday Grisham led off. Then we got Soto, Machado, Drury, Cronenworth. So 1 through 5 built itself. But even Myers and Grisham, I'll get to some shares of them. Then you got Kim and Alfaro. I'll get to a lot less of them. But essentially 1 through 7. Mix and match that. I prefer I like the FanDuel spot where I can play Drury and Machado and not really have to sweat it. But it would be Soto, Machado, Drury, Cronenworth as my favorite core of that.
Yeah, absolutely with you on that. Drury's the guy that I call out just every time we've had the opportunity to throughout the last couple of weeks. 23 home runs on the season, a 240 ISO, just has been terrific and just does not get ownership on these slates. He's 2% owned on DK, 2% owned on FanDuel, multi-position, 1st and 3rd on DK, 2nd and 3rd on FanDuel. Still decent price on FanDuel. He's expensive on DK, but he's worth it. He's had a killer season, made specific changes to his swing plane coming into the year, and it's paid dividends. So yeah, I would be getting to that all the way down through 1 through 7. If you're on DK, you need a cheap catcher. Is Alfaro in the lineup?
Yeah, he's in 9th spot.
So I think he's a reasonable cheap catcher play on the DK slate. So there's enough there that I can roster this lineup up and down. What about the Cards? They were the one that I called out as my spot. Are you pushing some Cards in?
Yeah, 100. They were number 3 for me, and they might, now that Josh Bell isn't in the lineup, they might actually jump in my aggregate. And it's Cardinals against the lefties till the day I die. It's what you want. And then I don't think that lineup is out, but Albert Pujols is like top 5 in OPS against lefties this year.
Albert Pujols over the last 43 games or so has like 1,300 OPS, like 6 home runs. He's been on fire since the All-Star break.
Does that sound like a guy who should be min price on DraftKings.com?
No,
it doesn't.
Not against the lefty. No. 48.1% hard hit, 10% barrel rate on the season. Only strikes out 15% of the time. 11 home runs at 221 ISO. Creates runs 28% better than average. Sign me up.
That's what
3% owned. 3% owned. Really? Dude's pushing 700 home runs in his career. What are we doing here? Yeah, I like that spot a lot. I can play this lineup depending on what comes out, what the final form of it is. This is usually like a 1 through 7 lineup, at least for me. And, a lot of times 1 through 9. So it depends on what we get here. But I like this lineup a lot. Tyler O'Neill, really the only player on either site drawing any attention. 15% owned on DK and 22% because he's only $3,000 on the FanDuel slate. I like Tyler O'Neill a lot. And if you're stacking, it's easy enough to differentiate because nobody else is really drawing much attention. Any specific bats that you want to call out outside of the Albert Pujols there?
If you're going to give me Paul Goldschmidt, I'll take it. I would gladly. Revenge narrative. Let's go with that. Man, Tommy Henry, but this is what you want. 50% fly ball rate, 40% hard contact, 13% walk rate. And if you walk a couple of these Cardinals, they'll snag a bag or two. So and Goldie, he'll get cheered when he steps into that box. So this is just a beautiful, beautiful spot for them. And our boy Eric's in chat. If you play on FanDuel, you could play Pujols and Goldsmith. Why not both?
Love it. And I tell you what, that's such a good differentiator. I love doing that. I love playing good catchers when I can on FanDuel, and then combining it with a catcher and then put a first baseman in the util spot from the same team, or when there's multiple first basemen like that, just put them both in your lineup, because a lot of people, it doesn't come out that way in the optimizers a lot. And a lot of people don't just naturally do that. They don't like taking up the dual spots. So that's one of my favorite ways to get different pretty quickly. So, all right, let's talk about this Coors game. The Giants are in Coors. They're pulling 30% ownership up and down on the DK slate because everybody is $4,000 or less, and most players are below $3,000. On FanDuel, they're pulling fairly similar ownership. We know that they're going up against Lorena. It's a terrible pitcher. It's a great spot. What are you doing with these Giants? Are you getting to them? How are you handling this?
So they pre-flop are the best play on the board, but everyone knows that. I think at 30% ownership with 28 teams, I'm going to let the field have the onslaught stack in a 30%. Because if I script the rest of the slate, every other team at 6% or less, I'm going to script that and then leave the Rockies are still going to fall in those lineups where they may. So if I put a cap on some, the Giants are going to fall in those lineups where they may. If I put a cap on 2 or 3 Giants per lineup, I could still get to really, really good spots, but still be dedicated to these full onslaught stacks of everything else. It's an opportunity to have the entire board at 6% or less when the world is on one team. So I think that's how I'm going to play it, but I completely understand what an incredible spot Jose Urena is. And then it's just that much more crazy that they're coming in free on DraftKings. You don't have to sweat. You can play anyone. And by the way, that lineup did come out. So we did get a lot of questions answered. And there's a lot of lefties in this lineup against Urena. And like Adam was saying on the deeper dive, you more so have to worry about the righties getting pinch hit for against left-handed pitcher than the inverse. Not to say that these guys are completely safe, but they might be safer. And was it yesterday that Senzatella tore his ACL? When that happened, they brought in Austin Gomber, who threw 60 pitches. So they may only have one lefty out of the pen, and that's Lucas Gilbreth. And I don't care. So it might be a safer spot for these lefties to get 9 innings.
Okay. So, I mean, really, if we're taking ownership out of the equation, you're putting them in 150 out of 150 lineups, right? I mean, it's such a good spot, right? Price wise and everything, that it just makes sense from that regard. But given that ownership, like for me, I'm definitely going to be going the other direction. It's not that I'm going to full fade them by any means. I'll let them fall to some degree where they fall, like you're saying, but I want to be way under the field on these bats. I want to spread out. I will take the 27 other shots that the field's going to give me on all these other teams. On the other side of this game, even the Rockies also playing in Coors Field, going up against obviously a much, much better pitcher, but they're drawing low single digit ownership. Granted, the prices are oddly different and higher on a lot of those Rockies bats, but they're not completely incapable when they're in Coors Field going up against the lefty. So I think they're even interesting here, but I'd much rather just get to some of those Cardinals at no ownership or some of these other teams. So with that in mind, that it sounds like we both kind of want to spread out and go around the board a little bit. Where else are we looking for some upside here? What other teams are you seeing coming through in terms of stacks that you want to get to?
Yeah, who could score a touchdown on a Friday night? Well, I think the Blue Jays were obviously a team that I thought could take advantage of Yankee Stadium. I still think that, but 5 hits last night came from the bat of George Springer. He's not in the lineup tonight. So I wonder, what's going on with his health, but the Blue Jays are still on the board checking those boxes because the Yankees pitching is really, really struggling. Like them quite a bit. The Braves find a way to put up runs, and then Kyle Schwarber back in the lineup for the Phillies against Chris Bassett. The Phillies are not in a good spot pre-flop, but this is still a really plus park, Citizens Bank Park. They could put up some runs here, and that's a talented lineup. And then I think my favorite stack that we haven't talked about is the Orioles. They are in a fun spot against Cutter Crawford, and this is just getting to be a fun team. And don't blink, but this might be a playoff team this year, right? They might get ahead of schedule. And 2K special on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Kyle Stowers, I believe is how you say it. Great numbers in the minors for this price point. A 884 OPS, 19 bombs. Can swing a bat, and he's really, really cheap in a good RBI spot behind Mountcastle, Santander, and Rushman. So really, really fun spots. And these are all teams that probably shouldn't be 4, 3, 5, 6% owned, but they are. And it's this incredible opportunity.
Yeah, it makes it easy to get to a lot of these teams. And you see, even that number, as low as it is also pushed up a little bit by 11.7% on Adley Rutschman. You go below him in the lineup and you're talking about a bunch of guys under 1% popularity until you get to Rougned Odor at 3%. And, who cares? If you want him, is fine at 3%, but I don't really want him. But yeah, I agree. I think that's an interesting spot. Crawford, not without talent though, 24.3% strikeout rate on the year, 4.14 xFIP in his 64 2/3. So talented young pitcher, but I agree. I think that's a spot you can throw some O's bats. What about the Red Sox on the other side of this one, going up against Jordan Lyles? Also not really drawing all that much attention for their talents. Devers, the most popular player on the team at 14.8% on DK, 14% on FanDuel, also the most expensive bat. But you've got Bogarts up there. You've got Tommy Pham. Looks like no JD in the lineup, kind of a diminished version of their lineup. Are you going to any Red Sox stacks here, or going to the top half of the lineup at least?
Yeah, like I said, once you forego the Giants, this is a wide board. I am at 8% on the Sox. The lefties are, of course, are the main point of interest for me, and that goes for both sides on this park. Matter of fact, Cutter Crawford's weakness is left-handed power. There's a lot of left-handed power in tonight's Orioles lineup, so and that works both ways. Jordan Lyles, why did I say Lopez? 1.8 homer per 9 against lefties, so that's going to look really good for a guy like Rafi Devers. Yeah. Verdugo's batting second, been really, really nice. 800 plus OPS since the beginning of last year against righties. Nice little lane 2-3-4 with a lot of OPS, a lot of power, and a lot of hit for average too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are decent spots, and Devers kind of smashing through the top of my home run model here. So I like that call out a lot. 52% hard hit, 12.5% barrel, 25 homers and 445 plate appearances. Don't really have to sell Rafi Devers too hard to anybody, but I think that's a nice spot there. What about the Dodgers going up against Jesus Luzardo? Looks like they're ranking out fairly high on the Stokastic board. I didn't have them as highly ranked. I mean, they're the Dodgers, so they always rate out fairly well, and the top end of the lineup certainly projects just fine. But Luzardo, talented enough pitcher, 31.4% strikeout rate, a 3.18 xFIP, puts too many guys on via the walk, 10.3% walk rate this year in 46 innings, last year 11% in 95 1/3. But plenty of strikeout and a talented young pitcher. Wasn't somebody I was really looking to target, but given the ownership, given that it's the Dodgers and there's so many superstar caliber players on that team, is that a spot that you're looking at all?
To stack the Dodgers?
Yeah,
always. Yeah,
they rank out 4th on the DK board. Is I guess the short way to ask that question.
Yeah. I don't know that you could almost put any pitcher against the Dodgers, and I think you had to consider the Dodgers. I do have a lot of high bomb detector ratings on the Dodgers too. A 41% fly ball rate at a Luzardo, to 23% line drive rate. I think a lot of this, I still have some of last year's stuff influencing these numbers, but it's still something that I think that is attackable. And like you mentioned, the walk problem, 11% walk rate to righties this year. You can walk Mookie and Trey Turner if you want to. Then, you got a runner in scoring position real fast for a guy like Will Smith or Justin Turner to get in there. I do worry a little bit about potential platoon sub outs, the Chris Taylors, Hanser Robertos, maybe Trace Thompson, guys like that. So it could get a little volatile down there. But certainly 1 through 5 make a lot of sense. And the 6+ K price points on Mookie and Trey, they might suppress that a little bit. I know we have them at a 5% chance to be in a top stack, matching their ownership. But what is 5%? That's still really doggone low for the Dodgers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting spot given that Freddie Freeman for 2.3% ownership on DK, 0.8% on FanDuel. I can take some one-off shots with Freddie Freeman. Like, I don't care about lefties with a bat like Freddie Freeman, and just creates interesting spots like that. To your point, with the walk rate that Luis Orioles got, there are 5 or 6 guys in this lineup with a 10+% walk rate, several guys pushing into the mid-teens. So a lot of players on this team, patient hitters, don't strike out that much, a lot of balls in play. So I can see that spot coming through. Like I said, it wasn't one of the spots that was immediately at the top of mind for me. I was thinking about, just salivating over targeting Tommy Henry, Paulo Espino, some of these other guys, but that one does seem to make some sense. And Dodgers at low ownership, always interesting to me. Another team that's kind of highly ranked on the Stokastic board, looks like they're, call it 6th, 7th on the board here on DK, not getting any attention at all. The Seattle Mariners going up against Cole Irvin, 1% ownership for a 6th ranked stack. Are you getting any Mariners here?
Yeah. I know I keep saying it, but man, I'm just almost I almost have exposure to like 15 teams thanks to the Giants doing what they're doing. Because usually you can't be spread that thin and have like positive leverage everywhere, but that's where we're getting tonight. But yeah, certainly Mariners are in a good spot pre-flop. Obviously, this ballpark might be a little stressful to sweat, but we don't have to give up too much equity to be there, like you said. And there's a lot of talented bats. Julio Rodriguez, Ty France, a nice little 1-2 punch. Winker's hitting lefties a lot better this year than last year. Mitch Haniger came back. And then Eugenio Suarez, usually a giant strikeout risk at almost a 32% K rate against lefties since the beginning of last year, but Cole Irvin strikes out righties at just 17% so far this season with a sub 10% swinging strike rate. So he's got as good a shot as any to make contact. And when he does, he still has like a 14% barrel rate. So it's a good spot for him to bleed through with a bomb.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's an interesting spot. And if they're going to be that low owned, it's a frisky enough offense, frisky enough team against a bad pitcher that I can easily push a few extra chips in on the Mariners here. So yeah, overall, I think we're seeing the slate pretty similarly. We don't want to walk hand in hand with the field down that Giants path. They're interesting. We'll have some, but we want to spread out. Big slate, a lot of good spots. Throw me a home run pick. We got to wind this down and punch out of here. We got the NFL coming up in a minute, but throw me a home run pick, and then let's go favorite stack, favorite pitcher.
All right. As we do that, I need 200 plus likes with 720 people watching.
Oh,
this is ridiculous.
Right. What are you guys doing out there? I go through the show. I try and just talk baseball. I try and ignore the ad reads. I try and not harangue people for likes because I trust the people to hit the like button out there, but they're not going to do it. We're going to have to change that approach. I don't know. Give me a home run call, Gun. What do you got?
Cool. The bond detector's top guy is Trace Thompson. I'll give you Goldie, but whatever.
All right, is that where we want to stick with
if I had to put my life on a homer, it's probably Goldie tonight. But as far as my model is looking like Trace Thompson, and then Mike Trout's back. We didn't give him a lot of love, but he's third in my home run model.
Good call out there. Yeah, that's important to throw out there that Mike Trout is back in our lives. I was actually expecting him to miss the rest of the regular season, so nice to see him back and somewhat healthy again. For me, Vladdy and the rest of the to your point, the Blue Jays look pretty good. Rafi Devers, number 2 on the board. I'll just pick Rafi Devers as my my home run guy, lefty in that matchup in the Orioles park. What about your top pitcher in your top stack, and then we'll punch out?
So I'll go Brady Singer here, points per dollar, foregoing the obvious McClanahan, Blake Snell. And then I do think I just ran a test crunch. I jumped my Padres ownership with more Cardinals ownership. And usually when I go crazy with Cardinals against a lefty, I regret it last year, but this year it's been paying off a lot more. So Let's go Cards.
I love it. That's going to be my favorite stack, my smash spot. So guys, speaking of smash, hit that like button. We're at 227. We appreciate everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us. Good luck tonight. Stick around. We've got NFL live before lock for the preseason slate coming up right now.